We are the SEP Community Workshop 2021 Planning Committee, and I'm Sandy. And this is Zoanne. This is Connie. This is Mary. This is Jackie. This is Diane. This is Joanne. And unfortunately, Scott cannot be with us. It is a most wondrous thing that we can see salmon in our streams. It is proof positive of what can be accomplished with the hard work, blood, sweat, and tears of the many volunteers with desire, dedication, vision, determination, and the support from all levels of government. Thank you for introducing us to your unique and interesting watersheds through your SEPFlix videos. They allow us to stay connected until we gather again and share our successes and our challenges. So sit back and enjoy our workshop, and don't forget the tours on Sunday. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our wonderful firecracker of an MC, our Upper Island Campbell River Community Advisor, Stacy, who will keep us engaged and keep us on track for our SEP conference this weekend. Thank you very much. Enjoy, people.
Thank you, team. And thank you. We are all looking forward to seeing the results of your great work in planning the workshop. Next, I would like to introduce Colleen Pierre with the First Nations welcome.
Good day, everyone. My name is Colleen Pierre, Elder of the Kates First Nation. First of all, I take this opportunity to officially welcome you onto the traditional shared and unceded territory of the Kateses. And I also acknowledge and recognize my family from the Kwantlen and Queequutlan First Nation. Thank you, Capes, for extending the invite for me to participate in today's event. I do this out of honor and respect of my late husband, Dean Sam, who also participated in this event. I come before you to represent myself. Aitzkasia. Sam, I certainly hope you enjoy the day on Revelations.
We are pleased to pass along the welcomes from Honourable Bernadette Jordan, Minister of Fisheries and Oceans Canada and Coast Guard, as well as Rebecca Reid, our Regional Director General, and Terri Bonnet, the Area Director for the Fraser and BC Interior.
Hello everyone, I'm Bernadette Jordan, the Minister of Fisheries, Oceans and the Canadian Coast Guard. I'm joining you today from my home in Mi'kma'ki, the traditional unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Congratulations to the members of the Fisheries and Oceans Canada's Salmonoid Enhancement Program and the Maple Creek Watershed Stream Keepers for your ongoing dedication to our Pacific salmon over these past 30 years. For centuries, salmon have played a key role in the social and economic fabric of our Pacific coast. For Indigenous peoples in particular, the Pacific salmon holds a central place in their social, ceremonial, and subsistence aspects of life. We know the Pacific salmon are facing threats from climate change, contaminants, and changes to land and water use. That's why the protection and recovery of wild Pacific salmon stocks remains a priority for our government. As Canadians, it's our shared responsibility to steward our environment with care in ways that are practical, reasonable, and sustainable. Our government is working with the Government of British Columbia to ensure that our Pacific salmon strategy is coordinated, coherent, and connected. We've contributed an additional $5 million to the Pacific Salmon Endowment Fund to support the Pacific Salmon Foundation, which is doing incredible work and is an important voice in the development of the plans and programs to protect and restore wild Pacific salmon in its habitat. We made an additional $107 million federal investment to support the sustainability of Canada's major fish stocks through implementation of the Renewed Fisheries Act. And we've allocated $15 million in additional annual funding to support stock assessment, coded wire tagging, and catch monitoring of the Pacific salmon. These investments contribute to our obligations under the Canada-US Pacific Salmon Treaty and are targeted towards better understanding and management of West Coast salmon fisheries. Recently, we made a historic investment through our federal 2021 budget, which I hope will change the trajectory of the species for the long term. Over the next 5 years, we're going to invest $647 million to stabilize and conserve wild Pacific salmon populations through science and research, new hatchery facilities, habitat restoration, and more. We're also going to create a Pacific Salmon Secretariat and a Restoration Center for Expertise, improving management of commercial and recreational fisheries, and doubling the British Columbia Salmon Restoration and Innovation Fund with an additional $100 million. Of course, our government has an important role to play, but we can't do it alone. This is going to be all hands on deck, working in partnership across governments, regions, and fields for the long term to ensure this species not only survives, but it's restored to its former abundance. We need thousands of volunteers like you who turn your passion for our environment and wildlife into action. I want to thank you for being such incredible stewards of our shared lands and waters. I wish you all the very best and an enjoyable, productive workshop.
So hi, everybody. My name is Rebecca Reid. I am the Regional Director General for DFO Pacific Region. Thank you very much for the opportunity to send you a message of greeting and well wishes. I have participated in this community workshop a couple of times in the past, and I recall the amazing energy and enthusiasm at these gatherings that's so refreshing and motivating. While I wish we could all be together in person, it is my sincere pleasure to be here online with you. Before I begin, I would like to express my thanks to the organizing committee, specifically our host, the Maple Creek Watershed Stream Keepers, and the Kanaka Education and Environmental Partnership for putting together such an exciting opportunity for us to connect. I would also like to thank the Pacific Stream Keepers Federation and Norland Audiovisual for their support to this event. This is the first time that the SEP community workshop has gone digital. COVID has made all of us adapt and use technology to connect, and we are pleased to support this important event. Though it will be different from many of us has experienced, I hope you will all have a great experience at this workshop. I'm fortunate that in the SEP Community Advisors and the Salmon Enhancement Advisory Board, members keep me aware of your many accomplishments and the ongoing challenges you continue to face. And I sincerely appreciate and admire your commitment to working together to protect and enhance the fisheries resource. When I speak to senior leaders about your commitment and sheer numbers, eyebrows are raised about the huge expression of support that we receive. I expect you are all very happy, as are we, about the announcement of the $647 million over 5 years to support the Minister's mandate commitment to create a Pacific salmon strategy. We will be working with you and others over the coming months to define this work and to develop a collaborative path forward. Hopefully, you will see these commitments as recognition for the many challenges facing both salmon and the communities that care about them and depend on them. As a department, we are committed to providing the advice, support, and direction you need through these challenging times. I would like to express our appreciation for the value of your work, whether it's producing fish, restoring habitat, stream keeping, or educating the stewards of tomorrow. It's all critical to sustaining healthy watersheds and healthy ecosystems, a vision we all share. I hope that through this workshop, you will gain some new skills and will take this experience back to your community and continue with your valuable work. With the rollout of vaccines, I am looking forward to a future that allows for more opportunities to interact and get together. Please take care, and thank you again for your energy and commitment.
Welcome. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Terri, Bonnet, and I'm the Area Director for the Fraser Interior Area. I'm pleased to welcome you for this very first virtual SEP community workshop. While the hope was that each and all of you would have been able to visit the Fraser Interior Area, that can't happen with the pandemic, but I am glad that the coordinating team was able to make this happen in our new COVID-friendly world. So with that, welcome virtually to the Fraser Interior Area. This video is being created from my home in Coquitlam with my newly found COVID obsession houseplants. So that gives me lots of oxygen to work through this pandemic. I'm excited and thrilled today to see how the coordinating team has worked with the technology to make this happen. The coordinating committee has been led by Scott Ducharme, but I also wanted to say a special thanks to our community hosts, the Maple Creek Watershed Streamkeepers, the Kanaka Education and Environmental Partnership for pulling together this virtual opportunity. The Salmon Enhancement Program community's involvement plays such a vital role in engaging and supporting our community stewards in this vital work that benefits salmon. My first exposure to the CIP, or the Community Involvement Program, was before my time at DFO. I used to volunteer at Nunes Creek Hatchery in Port Moody. I spent many years volunteering there and played various roles on the board. This is actually where I first met Sandy and Scott. Sandy being the community advisor and Scott the technician. I'm glad to see Scott has actually joined our DFO family. Life got busy with kids and work, but I always say when I retire, I'm going to return to my volunteer days at the hatchery. Those days certainly brought me enjoyment, whether it was collecting bugs, educating the public, egg takes, fry releases. The sense of community at those facilities is huge. The Fraser Interior Area is a large geographic area with many challenges and opposing interests. This makes the work very challenging, but also very rewarding. The team we have in this area is very dedicated, and everyone that works on the team comes to the table fully prepared to tackle whatever the new challenge of the day is. Not just I, the department highly values all the work you do, from producing fish, restoring habitat, education, coordination. You're out there rain or shine. This work is critical to sustaining healthy watersheds and an ecosystem. I'm looking forward to popping in over the next couple days to see what this virtual session brings us, broaden my knowledge, and determine where I can actually help advance and support the work that all of you do. In closing, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to speak with all of you and to open up this first virtual session.
Our next presenters will be giving us details on a new program and important updates. Firstly, Sarah Murdoch, who's the Senior Director with the Pacific Salmon Strategy Initiative. She'll be giving us details on this exciting new program just announced by the Minister.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Murdoch, and I'm the Senior Director for the new Pacific Salmon Strategy Initiative with DFO in Pacific Region. This is a brand new role, and I'm excited today to be here. One of my first introductions on this brand new initiative that's coming forward this year. So I have a short presentation here I will walk you through. And the place I'd like to start is with the context and why we are focused on salmon on this dedicated specific initiative, and particularly as it relates to our federal response going forward to address what we're seeing in historic and very alarming Pacific salmon declines. So for a little bit of context, I just want to highlight a few key things. Some of you might be familiar with the Cohen Commission of Inquiry that happened back after 2009, 2010, and what we were seeing on the Fraser River in particular with salmon populations there. But it was a comprehensive multi-year commission of inquiry into what was going on with the Fraser sockeye populations in particular. And one of the key findings of that, there's a 3-volume set that came out of it. But what was interesting was in looking at the drivers of the declines of what we were seeing on the Fraser, Commissioner Cohen found that there was really no single smoking gun to explain what was going on with our salmon. That in what we are finding now, even more so, almost 10 years forward, is that Pacific salmon populations across the coast are being negatively affected at every stage of their life cycle by a combination of factors. And these can be grouped into 6 primary drivers in particular. The first one, and above all, and in basically playing into all the others, is climate change and warming waters. That's impacting salmon not only in the ocean environment, the coast, coastline, and also in the freshwater. And one of the key linkage points with that is we're seeing an increasing number of acute one-time events. This could be floods, but obviously one of the most notable ones over the last few years was the Big Bar landslide. But there are others, and I think more and more as climate change continues and we are learning to adapt, we need to be ready for more such events. And then we shift into other key drivers of decline for salmon, and they relate more to our human use of the land and resources. We, seeing increasingly habitat degradation, increasing land and water use pressures, and increasing pollution, which all also impact on our Pacific salmon populations. And last but not least, while we have done major reductions in the amount of harvesting on stocks in order to meet conservation objectives over the last 10 or 20 years, and I will get into that in a little bit, we are still seeing a significant amount of illegal and unregulated fishing or potential for it on the high seas. And that's an area where we would like to see doing more work. These salmon populations, or I guess a place to start would be the fact that when we talk about Pacific salmon, we're actually talking about 5 different species. And whereas I know all the people at this conference and on this call are well familiar with salmon, much more so than most of my folks or colleagues in Ottawa and across the country, I do think it's still worth pointing out that not all salmon are performing in the same and similar ways. And not all are facing the same drivers of decline and issues as others. So the problem is complex, and what we're proposing under the Pacific Salmon Strategy Initiative is a complex and multi-pronged approach. But we have seen our coho population struggling for some time, and in a lot of initiatives underway to sort of protect and rebuild those stocks. But what is particularly alarming at this point is what we're starting to see more and more in our Chinook and sockeye populations, and even in some cases our chum populations. So what we have here on the left is a bit of a diagram showing, based on available data, what we're seeing on the downward trends. And again, if you look under the sockeye and the Chinook columns, we're seeing alarming, basically, continuity of downward trends. On the right-hand side, what we've got here is a bit of an indicator, is looking at total Pacific salmon catch. And that's across all of our fisheries, Indigenous, recreational, and commercial. And what you notice is that by the mid-90s, we were starting to see a downward decline. And right up to 2018, you see that overall decline actually equates to about 50% of the catch. And what many of you, if you're following sort of what's been happening the last few years, we've been having to put in more and more conservative conservation measures to protect stocks since 2019 and 2020, and likely heading into 2021, which means this bar graph is continuing to go downwards. So with that context, another piece of key information, I guess, that sort of has led to the coming about of this initiative is the fact we have over 50 Chinook and sockeye populations right now under in the SARA listing process or under the list of stocks that COSEWIC is currently considering for classification under SARA. Which is an alarming trend. I mean, and at most we normally see a couple of populations of fish or in that process at one time, but we can definitely see we are at the start of a major shift in terms of many of our salmon populations needing support and needing immediate attention. In terms of the impact that these declines have had and are going to continue to have, some of the key points, again, many of this will be familiar to most of yourselves, but just for context, what helps other people understand why salmon are so important is one is there's over 190 First Nations across BC and Yukon who depend on an annual basis for salmon for food, social, ceremonial reasons, and many of those are also involved in the commercial fishery. We've got about 6,500 jobs right now linked to commercial harvest. That's despite the downward trends we've seen over the last 20 years. And what makes us a bit unique on our West Coast is just the extent of recreational anglers. There's over 300,000 individuals who annually get licensed for tidal recreational fishing in BC. And the vast majority of those are for salmon fishing. So all in all, when you put those together, it's about just over 400 million that's generated in annual GDP or gross domestic product from Pacific salmon, and of which, over 3/4 comes from the recreational sector and less than 1/4 comes from the commercial sector. That number used to be much, much higher, but that's sort of the current state of play. And as again, just the last little statistic there I have is just about the 50% decline we've seen since 1993. And I suspect that statistic needs actually updating given what we've had to see over the last couple of years. So it's with that context that what we're reacting to is the mounting pressure for change and to be doing something differently. We've been both inside DFO with yourselves in partnership and with others outside of the program, have been actively working in a vast array of ways to restore, to rebuild, and just to maintain healthy salmon populations. But what we're seeing is mounting pressure to maybe take new and bolder approaches. We're seeing alarmed salmon partners and stakeholders. We're seeing increasingly competition for scarce salmon allocation or resources. There's certainly pressure for us to make salmon management decisions in an increasingly data-poor environment. And that's particularly linked to the climate change driver that I mentioned. What we're finding is, and our science colleagues are telling us, is that their modeling isn't working the way it used to. It's hard to predict what's happening now because we're in really a new normal, not only from a COVID perspective, but also from a climate change perspective, which makes decision-making ever more challenging. And I think rightfully so, what this is garnering is a lack of trust in traditional approaches for how we manage salmon. Most of the ways that we have traditionally worked are kind of date back to the mid-90s. I know many of the salmon enhancement programs you all are involved with date back even earlier. And not to say that they weren't founded in an approach that made sense at the time and haven't evolved over the last 20 or more years. But I think the thinking is that we really need to be taking stock of what's happening to our salmon populations and asking ourselves whether we need to do more or or need to do things differently. I think one of the positive things is there's an increasing understanding and awareness that we are all in this together and that we need to leverage the work of others. There's no one group or level of government that can do this alone. But we definitely need, and this is something coming from DFO, we need support in how we manage our salmon, and we need the support of others. And that what we're seeing going on and even this need for change has it creates tensions, and it has personal impact on all of us who are involved in maintaining salmon populations here on the West Coast. So moving on, that's sort of our call to action. That sort of just quickly tries to summarize why this Pacific Salmon Strategy Initiative is needed now. And what was, I guess, a big key component of this was in January of 2019, the Prime Minister actually updated our Minister Bernadette Jordan, the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans in the Canadian Coast Guard, her mandate letter with a supplementary mandate letter that included 3 new mandate commitments. And what we were very excited to see here was one specifically dedicated to the need for to bring forward a new and transformative Pacific salmon strategy. And I kind of like to point out always 2 key observations around the mandate commitment, which I'll leave up there so people can take a read of. The first is that the first half of the statement is all about collaboration. It relates to all of the different groups that need to be involved as we move forward on this exercise, that it can't be left to not only the federal government, but it can't be left to any one group to be doing this on their own. The other key aspect that I think is really worth noting, and this dates back, just many of you may be familiar with and have been involved in the past in the development of the wild salmon policy. But again, we're basically doubling down and recommitting to this idea that we need to not only conserve and protect wild Pacific salmon in themselves, but the only way to do that successfully is conserving and protecting their habitats and ecosystems too. So I think that's a really important marker. That's our milestone, really, and our ground truth for the whole strategy, or the Pacific Salmon Strategy Initiative that we're wanting to move forward. The other big exciting news, which was just a few weeks ago, was the federal budget announcement. And in that, we got a landmark commitment to provide over almost $650 million over the next 5 years, starting immediately, to help us in this work of stabilizing and conserving wild salmon populations here on the Pacific coast. And a few things that they highlighted in that decision by Minister Freeland was that it would include additional research, it would include new hatchery facilities, it would include new habitat restoration work. It would be creating a new Pacific Salmon Secretariat within the department, so we'd have a coordinated and integrated approach for our salmon-related work to draw the connection points between all the different work that happens already on salmon. And it would also include the creation of a new center of expertise for restoration to build on the good work we already do in this area, but recognizing that we need to be able to provide even more technical support and advice to folks who outside of the department want to be making a difference regarding a salmon habitat restoration. We also need to look at improved management of commercial and recreational fisheries, those that remain. How do we make those sectors resilient going forward in a sustainable way, given the way stocks are at and the limited fishing opportunities available? It also included the doubling of our federal commitment to the BC Salmon Restoration and Innovation Fund, what we call BC SRIF, with doubling the initial $100 million investment with another $100 million. And lastly, it's about working with First Nations and also all fish harvesters on particularly those changes to how we manage fisheries on the West Coast, salmon fisheries. So with those 2 key pieces, that's sort of the overarching context for what we're calling the PSSI. But one key point we have of work we want to share with you all is trying to come up with a vision statement for what this should be how we should be framing all of this work going forward. We're excited about launching, as I said, a multi-pronged approach that looks at all of the levers available to address and all the different drivers of decline. But we want something that pulls this all together. And so what we have right now, and I think the idea here is that a vision statement typically needs to be short, plain language, memorable, but still provocative and challenging at the same time. So we have working together to make a difference for key Pacific salmon stocks and those that rely on them. So hopefully we will have many follow-up discussions in the future, but I will leave that with you all for now as just a starting point for something that we hope we can be reaching on with partners. Moving on, I would say the other piece is, again, we want to have some horizontal principles that are going to relate to all of this additional and revised news work that we have planned, or we do plan together under the PSSI banner. We think there's 5 obvious key horizontal principles, is what we've called them. One is that we see this as a huge opportunity for Indigenous reconciliation. There's a lot of First Nations engagement already in our salmon-related work and our salmon-related partnerships, and that should be the same and continue in any new investments done under the PSSI. Similarly, we've got lots of unique and interesting cases of where we work with partners around some innovative ways of doing our salmon work. But as I mentioned, a lot of our broader systems and frames of reference are all good 20 plus years old. What we want to do under this strategy is bring us not only up to 2021, but have a strategy that will carry us well into the future and be adaptive given climate change and other factors that are really uncertain. So we want to sort of have a principle that we will be looking wherever possible to take a more innovative approach to things. Similarly, what we realize is there's over 9,000 populations of salmon in the across BC and the Yukon. We need to be strategic in how we spend our collective resources and where we do them and how we do it. And so to that end, we think prioritization will be really important, making sure we have the science information ready to help inform our planning and to help inform our decisions around where we respectfully all put our efforts. It will be key. Rather than sprinkling it all out more broadly and not necessarily being able to measure or point to our results. I think this will go a long way also into the next one, which is that idea of more enhanced transparency, data, and trust. And the last one around partnerships and collaboration. I think there's no way we can have successful partnerships, or I should say continue to, because I would hope to say our partnerships with many of your organizations are extremely positive, but we want to continue and grow that under the strategy. And I think one of the key things of success that we've heard from many of you is that the better access to data, the better access to information, increased transparency around how we work, how we can work with you is sort of a key ingredient to that. And trying to get out from DFO sometimes inadvertently, not intentionally, but inadvertently be thought of as a black box where people just don't understand how things work or why they work the way they do. We really want to try to unpack that and make us be an easier partner to work with. So those are the 5 principles. In terms of the actual buckets or pillars or groupings for how we do the work, you might recognize these first 3. I know in the SEP world, there's often reference to the 3 H's, and these really mirror those. So the first one is really meant to capture work around habitat, and ecosystem. So we've called it our conservation and stewardship pillar under this new proposed federal response framework. But really it's about this idea that you cannot protect and recover salmon populations without addressing their ecosystems and habitat. The next one, salmon enhancement, which is often shorthand is referred to as hatcheries, and really seeing this as a key ingredient from a conservation basis on the use of strategic enhancement where needed to hopefully just help restore populations to what they once were. But in some cases, it will be important from avoid stocks from just simply blinking out. And I think we need to be ready for that and be well placed for that if we're at salmon enhancement, may be particularly the only piece left in terms of recovering and then allowing us to restore and rebuild. I mentioned harvest transformation in a bit. This is where DFO spent a lot of effort over the last several years, and there's always still more work to do, partly on making sure that we are not inadvertently impacting key stocks of concern, but also helping the various harvest sectors really transition to something that is resilient to where salmon populations are at. And so what does a commercial, Indigenous, and recreational fishery for salmon of the future look like? And helping make sure that our management models and management tools support those fisheries successfully. Because the stocks just are, and the level of catch just isn't there what it used to be back when these programs and regulations and systems were put in place. And then the 4th pillar under our response framework relates to integration and collaboration. And so a little bit different than the first 3 pillars. This one is really sort of the embedding or underpinning of the other 3. And it's really related to the idea that in our work, particularly within the department, but with others as well, we need our response to be integrated and breaking down silos, making sure we're all working and pulling together in the same common results and approaches. And to that end, we are looking at creating this integrated salmon secretariat within the department that won't replace or replicate all of the program work led out from various other programs and branches under within Pacific region, but it will bring that work together. And then similarly, we have the idea of really investing in our partnerships and our ability and our ways that we collaborate with others, and making sure that as we bring in, whether it's stewardship groups and others like yourselves, whether it's other levels of government like the Yukon Territory or the BC government, or academia or First Nations and other groups, that we're doing it in an effective way where DFO can be a good partner and we're setting up our partners for success. So that brings me to my next slide, which is really about just sort of describing how PSSI kind of sees how we see going from this point. One of them is, as I say, is we need to talk to people around what are some of the key areas of our existing salmon work that just need further support, further investments. And three that come to mind right away is some of our science around conservation and stewardship, in some of our tools like the idea of technical support around restoration. Our mechanisms that we have to partner and collaborate. We do a lot of engagement and consultations on harvest decisions, but we aren't set up to do the same level of planning around watershed planning or stewardship opportunities or rebuilding strategies. And those, again, as we spread our attention beyond just harvesting and look at these other drivers of decline, we see that as extremely important. Similarly, we think there are probably areas where we need to changes to our existing framework for how we work. And again, a lot of similarities there, but this idea of making sure we are more integrated and collaborative. I know on an individual level, everyone I work with wants to do that and aspires to that, but our systems sometimes get the best of us. So one of my jobs is unpacking that and breaking down those silos. And the other one, this is going to be tricky, is we mentioned this idea of prioritization. And while it's going to be really hard to prioritize some stocks over others, I think the idea being is that we all collectively spend a huge amount of effort all the time, every year, on working on salmon initiatives. But they're sometimes so spread out or diluted that we don't necessarily, it's not really clear what we're achieving for that effort. So what we think, at least when it comes to the department and our resourcing, we need to be able to clearly and transparently explain to people what are our priorities, what are our goals, and how are we getting there, and then measuring that success. We also think that there are some ways under the conservation and stewardship pillar, again, of making sure that our science links to our planning and links to our decisions. And then moving on to the new salmon work, I mean, this is the idea of exciting, of trying new things and doing them differently. The idea of incorporating much more innovation into our salmon work, being a more effective partner when it comes to partnerships and collaboration and on the Indigenous reconciliation front. Where we're at now, I mentioned this is a 5-year program or a 5-year initiative, at least so far. We basically got funding for our first phase, which is how government generally does its funding cycles. Year 1 we're describing as our ramp up year, but it starts basically now. This is actually one of my first kickoff meetings, and I'm hoping to do more of these over the coming weeks. But we are basically into the pre-implementation planning mode and getting ready to formally start external engagement in the next few weeks. And we're expecting Minister Jordan to also want to make an announcement formally kicking off this Pacific Salmon Strategy Initiative. And then as we do that, we are going to be getting our new secretariat up and running and moving into more formal engagement, where we want to basically put in place processes, particularly to talk about things like new work under habitat and conservation, in rebuilding and recovery in an effective way. And in some cases, it will be leaning into existing processes like this forum, like the regular CHAP process, like the regular network of streamkeeper organizations that are out there. In other cases, it might be creating new relationships or stronger relationships. For instance, many people have commented on the need for a closer link between what the BC government is doing and what the federal government is doing. And so we want to pursue things like that in a more structured way. What we're hoping is by the end of 2021-2022, we'll have launched a number of new initiatives under each of those 4 implementation framework pillars, and be moving into years 2 to 5, where we want to have continued implementation across the board on all these various initiatives, continued and maybe more structured engagement so people are able to link in to whether it's a broad initiative they're interested in or whether it's specific new programming that they want to stay abreast of. And we'll be basically, not only launching, but continuing to use these more what we're calling enhanced collaboration mechanisms. And that sort of takes me to the engagement. And so, as I said, we kind of jokingly internally right now are just calling this phase 0, but we are hoping to kick off. So you guys are my early bird guinea pigs, but we are hoping to really launch formally into an early engagement phase on PSSI with many key partners and stakeholders like yourselves, as well as folks inside the department who work on salmon related work over the next few months. And then the idea being is that after, as we move into the salmon season for this year and come out of it into the fall, we want to post-launch basically be in a more structured approach. We're working with a variety of stakeholders and partners on drilling down into the actual initiatives we're going to take on under the strategy, the framing of the strategy overall, and then measuring out what exactly is it we're trying to achieve on these and how are we going to know when we get there. And then the idea by the end of, I'm hoping, this fiscal year, so heading into next spring and next salmon cycle, we will have a good plan in place for how we are going to be collectively doing things differently and doing additional things and new things and increase things to help protect and restore some of our salmon populations and have a bit of a structured approach for how that will go on throughout the rest of these first 5 years. So in terms of our objectives for this first sort of kickoff phase of engagement, and I'd love to hear feedback from folks on this, is our key focus is making sure people have heard about this budget announcement, has heard about the new minister's new mandate commitment, and answered any key questions or concerns people have. And then we have sort of key areas where we're really looking for your views. So I'd like to use this as a bit of a kickoff point for that, as well as that draft vision statement. We're really going to be interested to hear, how do people want to be engaged, integrated into this work, and collaborated with around this work over the next 5 years in particular? Is it through existing mechanisms and processes that we already have that are working well? Do you see opportunities for new work or new ways of collaborating that maybe we just haven't had the capacity or the time to pause and think about to this point? And those are some of the key questions that we're hoping to ask people as we kind of over the next couple of months we get ready prior to the start of the salmon season, is how best to involve people on an ongoing basis and build on the successful relationships we have to date. And then the next piece is as we start to lay out what are some of those key initiatives we want to launch under those 4 pillars, under the harvest, the hatcheries, the enhancement, and the habitat-related work, and the better integration. What do you see as the key challenges to us being successful in that regard, and where are some of the key opportunities? We're looking, we're keen to hear people's views and thoughts. So with that, that's the end of the presentation. I'm really interested to hear people's thoughts and questions, and I really look forward to the chance in the future, in the coming weeks, to have a more collaborative and ongoing discussion around your thoughts on this new initiative and how best to connect with you all. So thanks very much.
And next, Bruce Runciman, who's the Manager of Integrated Planning, and he will be speaking on Fish and Fish Habitat Protection Program.
Today's presentation is a bit of a deeper dive into the responsibilities and activities of our integrated planning section. FFHPP is a new program at DFO, and integrated planning is a new division, but the work we're doing is not new to the department. As long ago as 1986, we had a policy for the management of fish habitat, which provided guidance for some 26 years to the habitat management program and was a very holistic or balanced approach. It had some very forward-looking pieces like net gain objectives, habitat conservation goals, restoration goals, habitat development goals or construction. And it supported those goals and objectives with a broad suite of strategies or approaches. Things like regulatory reviews were certainly part of it, but it was a more balanced program where integrated resource planning, research, consultation, information, education, all of these things were part of the program's activities. One of the things we weren't very good at was reporting our successes and linking our actions directly back to fisheries or to habitat productivity. And I think in no small part, that's why we found ourselves in 2012 with an amended act, a reduced organization, very much focused on regulatory reviews, smaller, centralized, as opposed to the area basis of the previous program, very scoped legislation and policies. But in 2018, the Fish and Fish Habitat Protection Program was created to replace the Fisheries Protection Program following the legislative review that was undertaken. And we now have in force those legislative amendments in C68 and are back to what I would say is strong legislation with these restored protections, new resources, new structure, and a return to a holistic approach, many of those strategies that I identified earlier. But now with regulatory tools as opposed to guidance, which I think is an important difference. And I'll review some of that as we get through the talk. Integrated planning with its sub-programs, Aquatic Invasive Species and Coastal Restoration Fund, are one of 7 divisions of SEPFlix. And the work we do, some or many of you may have seen previously, are typically presented in engagement sessions in a house diagram like this that speaks to the themes. I'm going to focus on that bottom left area for integrated planning. And just note for you here, when these diagrams are typically presented, a lot of those bullets in the highlighted area really track back to tools that are in the legislation. Restoration, habitat banking, cumulative effects, all regulatory instruments, or state of fish and fish habitat reporting, which I'll unpack later, but is a commitment to Treasury Board. A bit of a more fulsome account of what we do in integrated planning is provided by the strategic plan for FFHVP, and particularly strategic objectives 2, 3, and 4, which are around developing and providing evidence-based advice, proactive work to avoid, mitigate, offset harm to fish and habitat, or to develop fish and habitat protection objectives and integrate them into freshwater and coastal planning processes, and then conducting monitoring and reporting to determine the effectiveness of actions and adjust as needed. Specific activities to support those strategies and objectives were defined by the Biodiversity and Ecosystems Management Oversight Committee. That's a national group consisting of director level representatives from Biodiversity and Ecosystems Management. And I don't think my highlighting pops up. It was supposed to be a way of prompting, I guess, a realization of people that those points in the house diagram are captured here, ecologically significant areas, restoration, but with context. I feel these mandated activities by BMOC really speak to the setting of conservation objectives, identifying priorities, species, places, threats, proactive work, and enabling better outcomes for fish through regulatory instruments, and using information to inform planning and partnerships. The approach that integrated planning is using regionally and nationally to advance these activities really is about working with others. I'm always a little shy about this one because to a degree, we're all really busy and we're all working really hard. And a program like ours comes along and is saying, we're not bringing necessarily a ton of additional resources, but we want to work with you. I guess the upside is we want to achieve common interests and better outcomes for fish, and the kind of approaching, working with others, developing priorities, data-driven decisions, seeking and implementing technical advice is just part of that larger, I think, dynamic that we're in right now, the realization that in order to achieve these better outcomes, we have to work across sectors. So I guess what we're doing is something that we'll see more and more of in the department, but I have to admit a little discomfort when I ask for the time of already busy people. Nonetheless, I think if we get it right, expected outcomes are focusing activities rather than on all areas, all species all the time, but identifying and focusing on priority species, places, and threats. Trying to achieve more positive and supported outcomes for fish by collaboratively identifying priorities rather than unilaterally setting and sharing priorities. Informing plans that others will implement with their authorities with better fish and fish habitat information, so that at the end of the day our impacts are avoided. And then somewhat selfishly, if we're proactive and effective, we'll be reducing workload of our regulatory group. Again, I'm going to try to hammer this point home with the last slide and the next couple, that really our approach is about integration and coordination, realizing that all those on the phone and those not on the phone that work for the department, we have a really diverse and complex mandate. And if we're going to achieve better outcomes, we do need to work together. We have skills and expertise that apply to a lot of other groups within DFO, whether that's Indigenous engagement, stock recovery, and the like. But in terms of working more effectively with others, we're trying to do our part by defining program priorities. That way we can more strategically and effectively engage. But we're also looking for ways to collaborate with others. Some of you we've already reached out to I talk about things like identifying intersection points and roles and responsibilities. And that's another part of the work that we're doing, just to try and operationalize this integration and coordination. Last time I promised, here's just the ever popular placemat infographic, really trying to capture some of the ideas from the previous two slides. That integrated planning's vision is that we're going to take the tools and frameworks that I'll talk about as I progress here, but that lie in the amended Fisheries Act, and through engagement and actions with internal and external groups, and working cross-sectorally will support better some of the other regional sectors and regional priorities. This is one of those traditional high text dense, small micrographics, but you're not actually expected to read the org chart there. It's just to give you an impression. Each of these boxes is one individual, so it gives you an idea of the number of and distribution of individuals across the integrated planning division. At a high level, there's myself as the acting manager, the coastal section under Byron Nutton, a regional coordination and lower mainland section under Derek Nishimura, and an interior section which also supports activities in Yukon under Alston Bonnet. I just note that this structure that we adopted for integrated planning is a return back to sort of watershed-based activities from the centralization of the 2012 to 2018 period. A specific effort was done to match the organization of the regulatory group of FFHPP, so that we had colleagues and counterparts for watershed-based activities, and also to have that presence in the watersheds so that we can start to re-engage and build relationships with some of the stakeholders that we've become disconnected from in that 2012 to 2018 period. We implemented a blended work plan model, and that is that the by-3 level has assigned integrated planning watershed area responsibilities for engaging, supporting, and advancing these kind of proactive planning initiatives. But they also have a regional lead role. There's normally a land use sector like the ones that are listed, where they are the go-to person for their colleagues to identify things like relevant legislation, key actors, ongoing initiatives, and available guidance. They also have a national lead responsibility, which is plugging into the task teams of the integrated planning national working group and other linked groups such as the Aquatic Invasive Species National Managers Working Group. And they provide subject matter expert support to grants and contributions programs that are administered by EMB. This one is an interesting one, not just an obligation that the department has for delivery of these programs, but just the idea that if we engage early, setting priorities, evaluating proposals, that we can start to see some of our objectives perhaps better addressed through these funding programs. This slide here, so moving into activities that we're undertaking now, or how we're operationalizing some of those priorities and mandated activities from BMOC. Regional and watershed level engagement is something, as I mentioned, we had shifted away from for several years while we focused on the regulatory reviews. But re-engaging with internal and external partners and stakeholders, enabling early planning, integrated planning, land use planning, and water use planning to achieve better outcomes for fish is or perhaps the central part of the work that we hope to deliver regionally. There's a lot of reasons for that, but essentially, as others well know, when you engage outside groups with their own constituencies, their own influences, their own resources, their own regulatory processes, we're often able to make others aware and achieve outcomes that simply applying our own tools doesn't get us. So we're aware and starting that process of re-engaging, and I've just shared a couple of examples on this slide. One of them is the DFO BC Fish Habitat Committee, which certainly predates FFHPP, but was not really functioning very effectively. We did a bit of a reboot or reset of that committee this spring and summer, reviewed the terms of reference and confirmed them. Just to acquaint people with it, the BC DFO Fish Habitat Committee is a formal collaborative arrangement between ourselves and the province. It's accountable to the executive levels, the ADMs and the RDG and RDs at DFO, for recourse if there are issues of concern or that can't be resolved at the table. Its focus is around unpacking operational policy, legislation, and programs to find points that we can coordinate or cooperate and try to achieve, or advance at least, sustainable management for fish and habitat. One of the activities we took on this summer was identifying areas of common interest with the province that we could view jointly as work plan areas to advance, as opposed to requests from one or the other. I won't go into that long list, but it's things like agriculture, best management practices, regulatory coordination. Per the terms of reference for the Fish Habitat Committee, we have issue-specific working groups and project teams with defined DFO leads and provincial leads, so we know the first individuals to go to on these areas of common interest. One example is the Fish Passage Technical Working Group, which I know SEP is represented on, and FFHPP has recently rejoined, just trying to identify, prioritize fish passage projects that will yield better outcomes for fish and then bring resources and expertise to support them. Another example is Nechako and Upper Fraser Watershed Recovery and Conservation Initiative. This one originated as an influential regional ENGO, an individual that has served in various capacities with the department in the past, whether that's advisory or employee for that matter, but really was calling us up and many others and mayors and directors of provincial agencies and asking, what is everyone going to do about fish and habitat? And in line with this approach that integrated planning is taking, I guess we said, what are you going to do about it, to him and to the other people he was contacting. And really the result has been a collaborative effort to improve the state of habitat in the Nechako River, Stewart Lake system, and Upper Fraser. And I guess one of the really positive elements that, in my own view, is that first time in a long time, we've got a steering committee of one of these groups that's, in my experience, and the activities of our program is involving BC agencies bringing capacity and data to the table, as well as Indigenous groups, ENGOs, our environmental non-governmental organization, conservation groups, rod and gun groups, and other stakeholders. And the approach that we're going thus far is applying the little document there in the bottom right, watershed-based fish sustainability methods, so established methods that we could roll out regionally. So some people may say that perhaps the Nechako and Upper Fraser may not be the place to start, but we have an opportunity. We have willing engagement and interest and capacity in others, and so we're trying to advance that and support it as a model for what we could do elsewhere. State of fish and habitat reporting is really fundamental to most of what integrated planning has been assigned and hopes to do, whether that's identifying priorities, supporting planning activities with habitat assessments and stock assessments, or identifying restoration needs. It's also, though, important to note that it's a reporting commitment that DFO made to Treasury Board as part of the SEPFlix program funding. That is, we committed to 3 reports on the state of fish and fish habitat by March 31st, 2023. Regionally, integrated planning is working with our national working group to define approaches, tools, and metrics, basically a toolbox for state of fish and habitat reporting. But what I'm highlighting on this slide is interesting for a couple of reasons, to me anyway. One is, many of you have probably heard about the Freshwater Habitat Science Initiative, and I probably got the name not quite right, but it was really collaborative identification of science priorities across the country. And regionally, our freshwater ecosystem science group, in line with that national strategy, put forward a proposal to Nature Legacy for quantifying linkages between habitat and population status. In their application, really termed to aid recovery of species at risk. But this is an important project because it focuses on an existing tool, the Pacific Salmon Explorer. It's an online tool for analysis and reporting of population status and habitat status for salmon in the Pacific region, currently BC, but we'll plan to expand to Yukon. But it's bringing our science expertise together with our integrated planning group and the Pacific Salmon Foundation to evaluate relationships between their habitat metrics and their biological status of the conservation units, which are those that we applied in the wild salmon policy, to look for connections, and if you find connections, of course, between the habitat drivers and the population status, those are the areas that you can focus your planning and recovery efforts. And that's their next step, linking those results. And then finally, looking for additional metrics beyond those in the current tool and different scales, fine scale and broad scales, to make the Pacific Salmon Explorer a useful tool. And one of the major outputs or applications of that, of course, is state of fish and habitat reporting. Cumulative effects is another area that falls within integrated planning scope of activities. As I expect most people know, but a refresher here with the infographic is these are things like climate, ocean conditions, or human modifications that can combine, overlap, interact. They can be additive. They can be what they call synergistic, like have a combined effect much worse than the effect of them individually, or much less, perhaps. But basically, they can add up, and they can lead to larger impacts for habitat. DFO is on the hook legally for issues around cumulative effects because it's a factor considered in decision-making under the Fisheries Act. It's also something that is a factor considered under Impact Assessment Act and northern regulatory regimes. But the activity for integrated planning really are around collaborating with science as part of the Canadian Science Advisory Secretariat, studies that will be undertaken to define policy frameworks and operational considerations for cumulative effects analysis. Also to engage with the province of BC, which has developed a cumulative effects framework and has regional assessments that are shelf ready. Specific next steps, we're going to be finalizing a jurisdictional scan that we undertook nationally through the Integrated Planning Task Team for cumulative effects criteria. And based on that and things like state of fish and habitat reporting, developing tools to support regulatory decision-making and planning activities around cumulative effects. To the point of one of the earlier questions, ecologically significant areas are another element of the Modernized Fisheries Act. In fact, they were there in the 2012 revisions, but the C68 amendments updated the ESA provisions to increase clarity and of both the protections and the process for their application. I guess the key messages here are that ecologically significant areas are spatial conservation tools like marine protected areas, but they're not limited to the marine environment or the freshwater environment or to crown land. They are established or would be established under regulation. The fact that they're under regulation and would have prohibited and prescribed and unlisted activities would provide a degree of transparency that is not really currently available to people outside the department in terms of what regulatory decisions DFO might arrive to in an area that is either highly productive, rare, or unique, which is supposed to be the focal point for establishment of ESAs. As I mentioned, ESAs a regulation establishing an ESA can include prescribed works, which is works that must be authorized in all circumstances if they are to proceed and would have to be evaluated against conservation objectives established for the ESA. It would have prohibited works, that is, works that DFO will not authorize because they're inconsistent and cannot be mitigated and thus would compromise those conservation objectives. And then unlisted works, which would simply proceed under DFO's normal or FFHPP's standard regulatory review process. So they're quite a flexible spatial conservation tool. Then they can be applied to both pristine areas, but also to areas where restoration is required. And those restoration objectives can be set at the same time as the conservation objectives are established to ensure complementarity. Integrated planning, or FFHPP writ large, is supporting engagement activities that some of you may have heard about, and if you haven't, you probably will soon. National engagement will be rolling out this fall on a number of topics around Fisheries Act implementation, many of them tracking to integrated planning, things like ESAs, cumulative effects, state of habitat reporting, or public registry at least. So we're supporting the development of those engagement materials and the approach for engagement nationally and regionally. Informing that and the framework that will ultimately be published in April 2022. We completed a jurisdictional scan nationally of spatial conservation tools. We'll also be undertaking a desktop, well, maybe perhaps not entirely desktop pilot for developing and implementing a work plan for an ESA in Pacific region, focusing on the heart of the Fraser between Agassiz and Hope. It's an area that's been highlighted externally and internally as it meets the criteria. Rare, unique, highly productive for juvenile salmon particularly. And to the earlier question, yes, a lot of thinking has gone into it, but we're going through the engagement process this fall and winter, externally and internally, but intending to publish a framework for identification, establishment, and management of ESAs by April 2022. Restoration and offsetting is another area that in which DFO is implicated by legal obligations under the Fisheries Act, and that's because the minister or the delegated responsible authorities have to consider restoration objectives before they recommend new regulations or exercise existing powers like authorizations to harm fish habitat. Generally speaking, there's three categories of restoration that we encounter. Altruistic, really no expectation of anything but a positive outcome for fish, no benefit to the person doing it. Let's go to number three, offsetting, where we have a regulatory requirement to create habitat as a condition of an authorization to do harm habitat. And then something in the middle, habitat banking, which is proactive or in advance of any need for a legal offset. A proponent can construct or restore habitat and then create a balance or a credit, which if they need an authorization in future, they may draw down if the department agrees. Some of the integrated planning roles in restoration and offsetting are developing regional restoration strategies, again informed by state efficient habitat reporting, identification of priority species and threats for restoration, and then using those to inform restoration objectives and priorities that could be used internally and externally. Also facilitating restoration with external partners, partly by regional inventories of restoration, maps, database, and other tools, but also through things like our grants and contributions program. And then modernizing the DFO habitat banking and offsetting policies, which is on a similar time to the ESAs. A quick hit on what is habitat banking for those that are not familiar with it. As I mentioned, it's proactive offsetting, essentially. It's building fish habitat, and it's not altruistic because the proponent is expecting to get credit for it and to utilize those credits against a regulatory requirement in future. But the Fisheries Act amendments do clarify some of the previous clauses around habitat banks, better definition of terms, certificates that validate these habitat credits, and definition of geographic areas that credits can be applied, so that if the department is going to issue an authorization to harm habitat because of a work undertaking or activity around water, then we can decide if the offsetting can come from a habitat bank because it's appropriate, and to ensure that that habitat that is being created or offered as an offset is relevant to the lost production that would happen through the authorized harms. Interesting point, one that always comes up externally at least, is there's no intention at present for third-party or market-based habitat banking. So where a third party would build and sell habitat to people that needed regulatory approvals. That came up as a big push during the Senate Standing Committee hearings that fed into the C-68 regulatory amendments, but was not supported. This just gives you a bit of a picture. Why would people want to build habitat banks? One is because it gives them certainty, though that certainty comes at a cost, that there is habitat available or opportunities available to offset if they need an authorization down the road. It can also be of use to the department, because if you look at areas that are highly productive, that are complex, it's tough to identify an offset for the individual elements, say subtidal rocky reef or intertidal flat, in isolation of the other elements. And when you instead draw down balances from a habitat bank, you've established that it's functional habitat and an appropriate replacement. And this is an example of what one looks like in real life. New Brighton Park in the lower mainland, where you have an armored shoreline on the left, big playing field, not much going on there above it except culverts draining the roads. And then on the right, after the construction was completed, you'd have areas that could be accessed by juvenile salmon or bait fish, forage fish, sorry, I should say, and more diverse intertidal area. I'll probably stop there. As I mentioned earlier, there are a couple of sub-programs within integrated planning, and one of them is the Coastal Restoration Fund. And while it's a grant and contribution, before stepping into this one, I would mention this only recently came over to integrated planning and was led since inception, developed and led and delivered by the Salmon Audit Enhancement Program, the Resource Restoration Unit under Adam Silverstein. So really all credit to that group for the work that they did. It's recently transferred as where basically where the positions originated with our program. But it's a contribution program like many others, like Nature Legacy and Habitat Stewardship Program. But it was designed a little differently. Instead of a specific envelopes of work, it broadly supports things like habitat planning, restoration, monitoring, maintenance. Often elements of those are ineligible under other funding envelopes. It's also somewhat unique because the subject matter experts, the DFO biologists, the CRF biologists, provide technical guidance, assistance in the field and otherwise, and oversight of the funded project. So a much higher level of engagement. And that was by design, because in other funding programs, we've observed that the degree to which the department engages in these projects and with the proponents can often shape more positive outcomes for the fish and habitat. To date, we've funded 25 projects in Pacific region to the tune of about $26.8 million under the Coastal Restoration Fund. And one example is just presented on this slide of the San Juan and Gordon River Estuary and Coastal Area Restoration Project, led by the Cheetah First Nation, funded for about $1.7 million over 4 years. They're improving estuarine habitats for Chinook salmon and forage fish in the San Juan and Gordon River estuaries. And you can see in these pictures isolated tidal channels that, through things like culvert replacement with bridges, we're reconnecting and provide access for juvenile fish, but also restoring estuarine vegetation to enhance forage fish habitat. The other sub-program within integrated planning is the Aquatic Invasive Species Unit. The Aquatic Invasive Species Unit is funded through the AIS National Core Program of DFO and is focused on implementation of the aquatic invasive species regulations. Basically, these regulations protect water bodies by preventing spread and introduction and giving some tools for response to invasive species. And for those to whom this is a little unfamiliar, aquatic invasive species, the focus of this program could be fish, invertebrates, or plants that are introduced in aquatic environments outside their range, but that either by their behavior or their predation, their habitat use, can either outcompete or harm native species. And some of the impacts that they have are direct predation, mortality of native species, but also just increasing maintenance costs for aquatic industries like shellfish on water intakes, and generally reducing biodiversity and habitat quality. Our programming for AIS and Pacific regions delivered by Integrated Planning AIS Unit, as I mentioned, but not in isolation. We collaborate with Conservation and Protection, with Science Branch, with FAM, and with SEP. For example, with SEP providing information via the CAs to groups that are concerned about AIS. With FAM, things like licensing. Main activities, though, as I mentioned, implementation of the AIS regulations, seeking and acting on scientific advice, and advancing that advice through 4 main program pillars: prevention of AIS introduction, early detection of presence, response to prevent establishment, or then control and management. On the right, you'll see green crab, European green crab, which is the focus in Pacific region of our AIS activities. And I'm going to try, give us points for innovation, to play a video.
My name is Reid. I'm the Aquatic Invasive Species Coordinator within the Aquatic Invasive Species National Core Program for Fisheries and Oceans Canada. European green crab are a threat to shorelines because they compete with our native species. They change landscapes. They'll actually excavate eelgrass beds, which is a very important habitat feature for our juvenile salmon. They also mine foreign invertebrates within salt marsh benches, causing erosion. They will alter our shoreline communities if allowed to establish.
My name is Patty Menning. I'm an aquatic invasive species biologist. I work for the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. We have a lot of native species that are green, and so it's really important to differentiate between the European invasive green crab versus our own native green crabs. When I'm bringing up a crab trap, I can tell immediately that it's European green crab. Even if the crab, it might be discolored or black, or even sometimes they can become very orange. Green crabs are very distinct, and they have this sort of, I call it a diamond or a triangular shape. The other way I can tell is it has 5 very distinct teeth on either side of the eye. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These marginal teeth are very distinctive.
If you are very confident that it is European green crab, it should not be placed back in the water. Finding one crab usually means that there is more. One crab, one female juvenile, can hold 185,000 eggs per spawning period, and they can spawn up to twice a year. So one crab can produce a vast population. So it's very important that even one crab be reported to us.
Please contact DFO. If you see the crab, take a picture of it, and we'll get back to you immediately.
Our next set of speakers will be giving us details of the entire SEP program. Please let me introduce Adam Silverstein, the Regional Manager of Salmonid Enhancement Program. Next will be Dale Derochers, who is the Acting Regional Manager of SEP for the Community Involvement Program and Resource Restoration Unit. Then Corino Salomi, who is the Regional Manager of the Enhancement Operations of SEP. And finally, Ryan Galbraith, who's the Regional Manager of the SEP Planning and Assessment.
Hello, everyone. My name is Adam Silverstein, and I am currently acting as the Director of the Salmonid Enhancement Program. On behalf of DFO, I am very pleased to welcome you to the 15th Biannual Salmonid Enhancement Program Community Workshop. This is my 6th workshop, and while I am sad that we don't have the opportunity to be together in person, I had no doubt that the spirit and dedication of the volunteer community would result in an excellent event to bridge the gap. I can speak for all SEP staff when I say that we take a lot of pride in being able to contribute to the volunteer and stewardship community, and I am certain that we will all collectively work towards our next opportunity to be together face-to-face and to celebrate your efforts and dedication. Even virtually, this event does not happen without a small group of people working insanely hard for a long period of time. I'd like to thank our hosts, the Maple Creek Watershed Streamkeepers and the Kanaka Education and Environmental Partnership, and all the others who are behind the scenes making this unconventional format work. I would also like to acknowledge Zoanne Morton and the Pacific Streamkeepers, CHAB, and Norland Audiovisual for helping pull this all together. It's always a pleasure to speak with this group of people, but it's certainly a daunting challenge to express our gratitude and the appreciation of the Government of Canada for all the work that you do that benefits all Canadians. In a normal workshop, we'd have time to walk you through lots of the detailed efforts and specific projects our program is working on to support you and Pacific salmon. I know you'll be hearing from a variety of people on the SEP team about the work we are trying to do to support your efforts and to support salmon conservation and fisheries across the region. But I'd like to give you a high-level overview of our key efforts over the last year and looking forward into the new year. In the past year, like everyone else, a major focus of our efforts has been on maintaining our operations in a safe and sustainable way and responding to the day-to-day challenges of working across the region in remote areas and in the context of a global pandemic. Given the current situation, this vigilance will be important to maintain in the coming months. We continue to invest in supporting the response to the Big Bar slide and many of other urgent conservation concerns around the region through technical advice, personnel, enhancement, restoration projects, monitoring, and planning. In relation to this, we have seen a huge increase in the interest of a variety of different groups to start or expand enhancement programming. We have been working internally on how we can manage these demands and hope to expand this conversation in the near future. We also have a newly revised Pacific Salmon Treaty and have received some funding to improve our program's ability to support the treaty, including the acquisition of new automated marking trailers, and are working to implement this new programming. We've been supporting both external proposals, recipients, active projects, and the internal review process for funding programs like the BC Salmon Restoration and Innovation Fund and other granting programs that are supporting the important work you do. We continue to develop new tools and guidance to meet our commitments under the Wild Salmon Policy Implementation Plan, and we're improving our own program reporting and have developed an annual report that will be shared with you and our other partners in the near future. We have also worked with First Nations and consultants to lead an investigation into the feasibility of new enhancement facilities in the Mid and Upper Fraser region. We've followed through on our production planning framework and have developed a replacement to our main production tracking database, NPRO, and we continue to recruit new staff and ensure positions are filled so we can support our partners and deliver on our many commitments. Finally, we are working very hard on the exciting new commitments in the Minister's mandate letter and the resources announced in the federal budget to support Pacific salmon. I'm sure you'll be hearing more about this over the weekend and in the coming weeks and months. We are very excited and motivated by this direction, the challenges it will bring, and the support from individuals and groups like yourself. Personally, I'm extremely excited for the day when I get to start getting out again to renew our relationships and to better understand and support our operations and our partners. In the meantime, please know that you can reach out through your DFO contacts to anyone on the SEP team.
Hi, folks. What a pleasure it is for me to be here with you today. My name is Dale Derochers, and I'm the Regional Manager of the Community Involvement and Resource Restoration Program. So today you're going to see me talk about three main areas: how we're structured and who we are and what we do. And I'm really going to speak mostly on the what we do, but there's a couple slides on about how we're structured and who we are. Right now you're seeing a graphic of a wheel that shows on one side gray, the other side blue, which just depicts what the community involvement restoration groups are. It's just split into resource restoration and community involvement and some broad groups of what they entail: education, stewardship, community enhancement on the CI side, monitoring, infrastructure maintenance, watershed planning, and project implementation on the RRU side. One thing I wanted to just make sure that everybody's aware of this, that there's four main areas within the Pacific region: South Coast, Vancouver Island, Sunshine Coast. Then you have North Coast, the Yukon, and the BC Interior, which comprises the Lower Mainland, up through Kamloops, and up to Prince George. There's the 5 area offices with the section heads identified. Yukon, we have Steve Smith. South Coast, we have the acting section head of Erica Blake. North Coast is Lana Miller. Fraser Interior is Joel Harding. And as the regional manager, myself, Dale. Every area has restoration biologists, engineers, and community advisors all working together to support you. Restoration is, really, as this slide shows, restoring salmon habitats. There's, 4 broad categories, as I mentioned earlier, and that, this is a dynamic group of people that are working hard to do really important work, and these next few slides will really show that. I wanted you to just take note of the slide on the top right corner of that wonderful infrastructure that's there, that water plumbing. I'll talk about it a little later on. This slide is really about some really exciting work that the Resource Restoration Unit's doing. It's about the information that we're gathering about restoration projects that have been carried out by the unit, and it's putting it in a format that is that's usable not only internally for us, for our data collection, reporting internally, both at the local level, but also national level, and also being able to end up providing a product that is usable through a mapping platform. And on the right, the top is a database that collects all the different metrics that are out there, the type of habitat that we're in, the amount of area that was being restored, locations, etc. And the middle diagram is really a geographic or a picture of a geo-based system that shows you using Google Maps that we can have our restoration sites identified, and then you click on one of those dots and you'll have an insert that pops up and just provides you a greater detail about the type of work that's been going on. So it's something that I know internally and externally people have been wanting to see for a long time, and I'm really proud to say that we're finally getting to that spot. The series of slides you're looking at now is the Cleanza Creek Weir Placement Project. This is a project funded by the Coastal Restoration Fund and led by the North Coast Skeena Fisheries Stewardship Society, and it's partnered with the Kitsilus First Nation. The Cleanza Creek is a tributary to the Skeena River near Terrace, BC. Little history: in 1966, about a 600-meter portion of the Cleanza Creek was channelized, and during the Highway 16 realignment, and that channelized area now had lacked any kind of habitat complexity and gravel for spawning. So this project really was the installation of 2 full-span weirs during the winter of 2020 to add that complexity that was taken away and to create some spawning habitat. The DFO ROU staff in the area, along with the CRF biologist Dave Pell, supported the project not only at the planning and design, but also fish salvage, construction, oversight, and effectiveness monitoring. And then in fall of 2020, the weir started to successfully gather some gravel, and some pink salmon were noticed to be spawning in those areas. So just immediate results from that work. And as you see, it's been done in the winter, and anybody that knows anything about the North, a lot of the work is done in the winter, and that just adds another layer of complexity to the simple logistics. The next project I'm going to focus on is the Campbell River Gravel Placement Project. And that's here on Vancouver Island. There's lots of Campbell Rivers around. This one is really about a project that's supporting the ongoing efforts to maintain natural spawning population of Chinook in a BC hydro-regulated system. So the Campbell River was dammed 60 years ago for hydroelectricity, resulting in 3 generation stations and 3 reservoirs, and that had no real ability to have natural gravel recruitment. Over the decades, high flows have scoured and transported some of the gravels downstream, and without that ability to replace the gravels, this just ends up being a site that has chronic deprivation of gravel. So this project is really an annual placement of spawning habitat that is put into the system. It's funded through the BC Hydro Fish Wildlife Compensation Program and supported by the Campbell River Salmon Foundation. The next project I want to talk to you about is the Nanaimo Estuary Dike Breaching Project here on Vancouver Island. And it's designed to restore the natural estuarine processes and function. In partnership with the Nature's Trust, British Columbia, and the Sanemu First Nation, they collectively work together to address the berm removal that exists in the Nanaimo Estuary, to reconnect the tidal channels and to remove invasive vegetation species. There's a lot of historic waste material that had to be addressed with, fish passage issues that had to be addressed as well, and evaluate the hydrology of the Nanaimo River. The photos that you can see here are the progression of the berm removal of the tidal channel reconnection. There is some people you can see in the background with some high-vis vests on that really give you a sense of scale. They're really large sites to be working on. There's a lot of considerations that need to go into this type of work. and many small channels reconnected and new channels introduced to increase that overall flow within the whole area. And even this site is continuing today with ongoing monitoring of populations that are utilizing these new habitats. So very positive work. This project is the Mariah Slough Spawning Channel Maintenance Project. And the reason you can't undertake restoration without planning for maintenance, it's just that simple. Here, this the Seymour Channel. It's a spawning channel that was built in the mid-90s on Mariah Slough and targeting the Mariah Slough Chinook. And you have these sites that are constantly needed to be evaluated and constantly need to be maintained to just continue to have the conditions that they were designed for. Sometimes maintenance is on a much more frequent basis because some parameters of the initial consideration in the design didn't pan out the way you thought, but sometimes the maintenance schedule is a lot further down the road. But regardless, maintenance is definitely something that is to be considered in any restoration. This here is the Alvin Patterson Spawning Channel. It's maintenance of that same channel. That's the picture on the left on the top. And on the bottom right is the intake associated with the Coquitlam hatchery. And in here, the spawning channel, the Alvin Patterson spawning channel, had to be regraded and regraveled. The sediment trap was built at the top end. You can see that little pole there to filter out the fine sediments, and the remainder of the channel was cleaned out. The debris were removed and armored in place and ready for subsequent years. And with the result that the flow in that channel pretty much doubled. Intakes, the reason I threw that picture up there is intakes, no matter where they are and for what they are typically problematic. They require a lot of maintenance usually, and this is just work to install a new intake for the Coquitlam hatchery. Watershed health, this slide is really to talk about just how resource restoration staff undertake in gathering information to support data collection. And these are a series of photos from the Campbell River and Tassus estuary. The goals are always varied, but in this case, they're to investigate temporal and spatial juvenile salmonid use of estuarine and nearshore habitats. It also provides opportunities for internal DFO staff training and collaboration, as well as with external partners. And it's also it's just a whole lot of fun to get out there and do beach sailing. And in case you're wondering, on the bottom left, that's a picture of the bay pikefish. This next picture is another one about data collection. And here, across the east coast of Vancouver Island, resource restoration staff undertaken vegetation surveys within estuaries to compare community vegetation growth inside the fenced area as to the outside, the unfenced areas. And why are they doing that? It's really to try to get a handle, assess the impacts of the intertidal marsh carrick species from resident populations of Canada geese that are grazing on that habitat. On the right is the Quatsi River estuary, and on the right is the Quatsi River estuary, and the road is bisecting it. That road was built years ago, and currently the restoration staff are working with local officials to propose several breaches within that dike to reestablish again that natural functioning of estuary habitat, which is critically important to juvenile salmonids. And part of that gathering that baseline data, you get to see some of the unexpected things happen, like the first observation of the European green crab that was found in that estuary in 2019. In the engineering groups in the restoration unit is that they can pilot some different techniques. And here this is about remote monitoring and remote monitoring equipment for small hatcheries. This type of equipment is being piloted to see for its usability for these remoter locations and for different situations. These remote systems can operate on grid power or solar power. They can use you can install a variety of sensors collecting a variety of information, whether it's DO or temperature, pressure, water levels, flow rates. You can communicate via Wi-Fi or cellular or even satellite. And the key part of that is that you set these parameters all up so that you have alarms, so that you can be notified of things as conditions are changing in your facility before the critical condition is occurring. So the site that we're looking at there is the Bush Creek hatchery, and just here in Ladysmith, just south of where I am. And the primary purpose of this site is to provide an early warning, as I said, for water supply failure. And so this risk has a tendency to freeze at some times of the year. And so this equipment that's on there sends out alerts when the temperature water drops below 1 degree, or if the water in the tank drops below a preset level. That's at the Salmon hatchery. And I remember the first time I went there and met with the hatchery manager, Lee George, and I looked back there and I was going over there and I'm looking at all those dials and valves and I'm going to touch them. And Lee just said, don't touch anything. Nobody's touched it for years. We don't want to touch anything because if we move it, we're afraid what's going to happen because it's pretty old and needs to be changed. And so here was an opportunity where RRU provided critical engineering support and came in to redesign, this failing pressures system that was there. They've are utilizing new what they call Singer pressure reducing valves, just to increase the flexibility and operability of the system. Put in things that will help the Lee and colleagues operate with some comfort and safety, knowing that there's relief valves for surge relief and emergency bypasses. So it's a wonderful resource that the RRU is able to provide in addition to doing work on habitats, but also to support the CDP and PIP hatcheries as best they can. Okay, that's going to leave restoration on for a while, and now we're going to switch gears and we're going to go over to the community involvement. And as you see in this slide, it's, you got some incubation, you got some enhancement on the top left, you've got some public engagement outreach on the top right, you got some education down at the bottom. And the bottom left, if nobody recognizes that young gentleman in the white hair, that's Peter McCulley from Goldstream, and just the inquisitiveness of our young water stewards and that are looking through that microscope and wondering, what the heck am I seeing? Let's start with the broodstock collection and the techniques, because there's a lot of them, but I'm only going to show a little bit of one of each or one of a few. Anyway, I'm sure there's more. This one's of, getting in the river with a net with a group of people. And on this, it's really the most exciting time of the enhancement cycle. It doesn't matter how old you are. And when there's fish in that net, it doesn't matter if there's somebody the same age beside you or if there's a young girl or boy just doing it for the first time. Everybody's excited. Everybody can't wait to get on the other side of the net to grab the fish. It's really invigorating. And so here are some folks netting for pinks on the Clexeter. This is now an example of folks that use a trap to do their broodstock collection. And it's all part of an enumeration fence. And I know a lot of you use that system, that setup. Here we have the capture of chum salmon returning to the Alouette River. It's at the lower part of the Fraser River, for those that don't know. And then these brood will be taken to the Alco hatchery. This shot is of the Cowichan River and the Chinook broodstock collection. Cowichan tribes and hatchery staff, which is a CEDP, are seining for Chinook brood. They usually do that every year on the lower part of the Cowichan through a net and boat system. Last year was interesting because of the flows that were present. The seining wasn't really effective, so they ended up resorting to the more traditional method of dip netting, and they actually got most of their brood through the dip netting. But again, it just, to me, the dedication of people that are passionate about the resource and the work that they're doing. Here we have a series of photos. This is again the Salmon River chum broodstock collection. I put this up there mostly because it's well, CAs are resourceful people, and you are resourceful people. You know, it's amazing how here this is an example of working together with a community group. I believe it was Fannie Mae in this case, finding some unused or no longer wanted equipment, in this case circular tubs, that were then brought to somebody that needs them, and that was the Salmon hatchery. And you know, we also had, in this case, major ops who no longer wanted the Atkins cells, to then offer them up. And it's this constant ability to resource existing equipment to reduce costs that is really a part of the success of the SEP program. And the other part about this was, you know, Salmon was hit hard last year with COVID-19. They had quite a few cases. The community was in full shutdown. The hatchery crew, that didn't stop them. They decided that they were going to self-isolate, work in a bubble, and were able to continue to do the work that they needed to do to catch the chum and do the enhancement. And also part of that, as you see on the right-hand side, undertake the traditional smokehouse of the chum, where they are providing that food fish back to the community. It's just they have it there. They're using traditional methods. They're teaching young people how to do the traditional smoking. It's just a wonderful circle to be a part of, and hats off to them for doing that. Then we come to, well, adipose clipping. It's an interesting process to be a part of, but it's an important marking tool to help assess contributions of hatchery-generated salmon to the fishery and to returning escapement numbers. In this case, we have the Port Coquitlam group that's doing some clipping of coho. It's really changed the experience of clipping. You know, here you see the COVID spacing. I'm used to shoulder to shoulder, everybody laughing and joking, and I'm sure that was going on here, but it doesn't seem so when you've got, you know, a lot more space and everybody's in mask and you got a plastic wall in front of you. It's definitely a different atmosphere. Another example of some exciting work undertaken and supported by the community advisors is the recent release of adult coho above the Coquitlam Dam. This is a truck and transport project. It's the first time in 105 years that the adult coho were able to spawn in their historical tributaries. Why? Well, the background was that, you know, the coho release was it's in a BC hydro system. Here we have the Coquitlam First Nation and Port Coquitlam District Hunting and Fishing Club, who worked together to try to capture fish and bring them up and above the dam so that they can spawn in a natural cycle. They found this was planned together, and the work was directed from all aspects, from as I say, the capture, the transport, and the release. And it's been just a fantastic example of the work done to support partnerships and collaboration. And you know, one thing I found too, that working together, that even the small things get done. Even the small things aren't overlooked. And it's with your help that these smaller items get identified, and through your community advisor, the work done to get them resolved. This here is an example of the X-Juice River, and it's really a 40-year-old gravel pit that was adjacent to the Skeena River that stranded fish, thousands of fish each year. Fish would be annually salvaged from the pond, usually around 3,000 coho fry a year, around there, some more, some less sometimes. And that's a lot of fish to strand if anybody's done stranding. And I know a lot of you have done more than 3,000, and I know you know what that effort means. But in 2019, and with the help of Ministry of Transportation and Kitsim-Kalem First Nation, the gravel pit, after trying to exhaust all the other opportunities to still keep it as fish habitat, it was decided that the best option was to infill it and to regrade it and promote the backflow so that it would not cause a stranding issue. And now that site will never trap and fish kill again. So good work on you folks for sometimes looking at, the best option is to take the option that eliminates the risk altogether. Maintenance, I'm back on maintenance again, and even CIP have maintenance. And sometimes the objectives are quite simple, but they're very important. And in this case, it's safety. This is the installation of a slip-proof asphalt strip on the walkway of the Mission Creek enumeration fence. The pictures are from August 22nd of last year that show the high water event. By the way, that's my birthday. You can get me gifts. That's okay. That year there was 4 high water events that happened, 2 in the summer, I believe, 2 in the fall. And, that was the first time the summer events that were really witnessed. And so you look at those flows and you want to make sure that you have good safety. You think about safety before anybody's crossing that site. And another aspect of maintenance that, CIP does, and it's not just RRU, is some of the, again, intake screens. Here we have the community advisor that worked to support with support of the village of Tassus, and Don and Billy of the Tassus Salmon Enhancement Society to replace the aging McKelvey Creek intake screen. Doesn't look like much, but it takes time, it takes effort, and it takes some planning. And again, you want to do it right time for safety, because it's, as you see, it can be a little dangerous if you aren't paying attention. And this next slide, it comes up, it says bearskin base seining. I'm laughing because the picture on the right you see with the lady with her thumbs up, that's Erin Harris. She's the community advisor in Haida Gwaii. With COVID, they decided to help do a communication piece, and it's really a super funny video. Unfortunately, I'm not very technically savvy, so I couldn't get the YouTube to play. There is a link, so I'll get you the link, so you'll have it also as a part of this workshop. But really, it's this same video is, the main star is Erin Harris. The background grunt work there, you can see the fellow back there is Brad Yonkman. And the audio was done by Terri Wood. And this video really teaches kids about how to safely net fish. And then they also just let kids see the variety of fish that one may find in right in their backyard. On the left, that picture on the left there is a picture of a sea cucumber. And on the right, I'm not going to tell you what that is. You'll have to watch the video and then you'll be able to see what it is. Oh, by the way, that both Brad and Terri Lynn are with the Hecate Streamkeepers. And then we have, it says juvenile coho assessments, but it's really about learning and supporting learning. And that's one of the foundations of the community involvement program. You guys are supporting learning at a variety of levels. And here we're just demonstrating that we have some young university students, the 4th year Simon Fraser University students that are out. It was actually March of last year, so pre-COVID. And they were carrying out juvenile assessments in the archery off-channel habitat ponds that were established by resource restoration. Oh gosh, quite a few years ago. I'm not sure of the year. But the point is that it's not just the young through the Stream to Sea program, and it's not just through events at either Rivers Day or hatchery events that you folks hold. There's lots of opportunities for young academics and to take part in our program. Boy, I bet you everybody hates this photo of meetings. But, SEP staff, both restoration and community involvement, support a variety of planning tables that are going on across the region, from Bonnet Park to the interior, to the Fraser River panel, to the variety of the rebuilding roundtables that are occurring on Vancouver Island. At times that work can be a real grind on both staff and on resources to get them there, and the commitment that's required. But the payoff is to develop a watershed-driven collaboration approach is really can't be understated. It's very important work. It's sometimes slow and painful and takes time, get to where you want, but bringing people together, hearing opinions of across the table, learning and appreciating people's points of view can't be understated enough. Community groups play a key role in that process. They also play a very key role as an advocate for not only these tables, but in discussions with local governments and around land use and bylaw decisions. The power of your voice cannot be understated. And I know from some of the interactions that I've had with you, I really appreciate that effort that you do, that you put out there for that. And a little bit more low-scale planning that, again, all of you do, but it's just as important. It's the planning and implementation that goes around whatever project that you have. And in this case, this is a small-scale restoration project. You have Jean-Michel Hansens, maybe that's how you say it. Sorry, Jean-Michel, of the Departure Bay Neighborhood Association. And here they're kicking around the can before they get out there to remove some invasive species and then plant some native species. I bet the situation looks familiar to all of you, whether you call them tailgate meetings or whatever they are, but they're always good to make sure that, one, everybody knows what their job is, everybody knows to be safe, especially nowadays with COVID, and making sure that you're having fun. This, like the RU, I'm really proud of the work that the CIP staff have been doing, and in really with thanks to you, because you're the folks that give us the information that we're doing. So this is just a slide to show how we're gathering the information, how we're utilizing it, and trying to maintain consistency about how we're collecting the data, and then how we are able to use that data to do some reporting. Again, not just internally, at a local level, but us also nationally, and then also publicly. So on the top, you see a database that's got a lot of information. This is around the GNCs, so all the contribution agreements that you've been working on, all the data that you've been providing, it's captured there. And it's then able to be utilized to be, as I say, to put these graphics together that start to talk about, the activities that are being supported and how much is being supported. And the one on the top right, you can see that 37% of our agreements all support public stewardship, and 46, which is the biggest piece of the pie, is around salmon enhancement. And similarly to that, the CIP side of the shop is also focusing on the rest of the work that you do, being more looking at some of the specifics of the outreach, but also of the education, and trying to, again, do some quantifying so that we can capture some numbers about how we're going about doing our business, and then being able to, again, clearly and transparently and repeatedly being able to report year after year on the fantastic work that not only you folks do, but also the people that are working hard to support you. In 1995 in Williams Lake, the SEP community workshop that was held there, that was where DFO first announced the Streamkeeper program. And it's hard to believe that it's 26 years ago. 26 years old this program is. And the foundation of that program has been and still is the Streamkeeper's Handbook and the modules. DFO worked with a number of important groups over years to develop and review and edit that handbook and the modules. And they were designed to really take a closer look at salmon habitat. And of course, this program was specifically designed to empower you and the SEP community to get a better understanding of the watersheds and to watch for change over time. And now here we are in 2021, and DFO is again working with important groups like yourself to modernize, to review and modernize and edit this functional piece. There's three main management tools, I think, that are going forward, hatchery, habitat, and harvest, that really need to be thought of in this modernization of the handbook. And so SEP has such a strong history with hatcheries and habitat through groups that are part of the SEP program. We've got real-time and substantial experience in delivering community hatcheries and monitoring habitat specifically. You folks have learned to share the wealth of information that you've gained on watersheds about the animals that are residing in them. Data collected using the Streamkeeper's protocols are extremely important because they can be entered into the PSKF database for ease of sharing with your group, with partners, and all levels of government. Yeah, through using them, you've tested water quality and you've learned to identify the invertebrates, the creepy, crawly things that are hiding under rocks and logs that you've put in through restoration work. And you found blockages that preventing salmon from entering streams. And most importantly, you've questioned why things are how they are. Just being inquisitive through the use of, or through the program, the Streamkeeper program. Some of the strengths, the in-person training available as a part of that program is there for across the province, and the online videos to help understand the more complex tasks are also available. Groups are able to take a closer look at the watersheds and determine the needs of the watershed and develop a ton of partners along the way. The monitoring, the use of the standardized protocols gives government, the department, comfort that the data can be collected and collected well and used to determine trends over time. Again, for examples, the data collection on returning salmon is important to help stock assessment, to determine stock status. Also determining PNI, acronym, proportional natural influence. On behalf of DFO, I want to thank you for all that you do. DFO is pleased, I am pleased to be able to work with you to help provide the tools, the techniques, the training and support from the network of community advisors as you work to enhance fish and fish habitat. I don't know about you, but I really like this part. Recognition, everybody likes to be acknowledged for the good work that they do, and no secret, everybody deserves to be acknowledged for the work that they do. No matter who you are, no matter what contribution you provide to your organization. Here on the left, we have long-time West Van Streamkeeper John Barker. He's being recognized for his amazing lifetime contribution to the salmon resource. And on the right, we have Darlene Bulprit. She's a member of the Seashell Nation on Sunshine Coast, and she's being recognized for her long-time contribution to the recovery efforts of the Saginaw Lake sockeye program. Now that brings us over to the education, and here's the classic Stream to Sea salmonids in the classroom photos that you see. I'm not sure of your experiences, but it's probably the same as mine. Is that I can't underestimate the benefits of this program. It's simply rewarding every time that I go into a class or assist with a release. The experience is just so uplifting. And here, we have an opportunity to demonstrate SEP working with our conservation and protection partners to deliver eggs to in this case, the Quam school here in the Nanaimo Indigenous School, that they're going to raise salmon in their classroom. And this happens, of course, across the region, everywhere. Rob Dams, he's an interesting man, Rob Dams. So Rob likes to give the older children in his area the more fulsome experience. And in this case, he and his colleagues provide a real-time egg and milk take right at the school, right in front of the kids. They get to see everything, which is kind of cool, actually. Typically, there would be a swarm of kids all around the fish, and that's how it works. But they've had enough time now to respect. They've learned to respect the orange cone markers, designating 6 feet away for safe social distancing, and to now obviously wear their mask. But it still doesn't stop people like Rob and the kids from enjoying the experience. And then we have fry release. I don't know about you, but I don't see any sad faces in that crowd. Not one. And I've never seen any. I think the only time I've seen a child crying is when there was no more fish to release. Releasing young salmon is simply equals pure joy. And here, this is the Eco Road School in Victoria releasing their fish. Education also, it's not just about that. It also, these opportunities provide CAs and yourselves as educators to the public, both young and old, to talk about whatever's important in the watershed, whatever's happening in your local area. Here, this is Scott Ducharme talking about storm drain marking, and to provide that connection, that critical connection to contamination of our waterways. But this, you folks do the same type of work that in your areas and focus in on your local streams that are important to you. And then we have the outreach. We have, in this case, we have fish dissections as an example, and then the outreach events. And again, I don't know about you, or probably a lot of you do, but I know community advisors, a lot of them like to cut up fish and talk about the various parts. And here, I'm picking on Erin Harris a little bit, but that's what happens when she sends me photos of herself. But, Erin's, in this case, she's got everybody's attention as she's pointing to this part or that. And she always says that pulling out the otolith is always the highlight. I can understand that. Why, you can cut open the head and that's it. Lots of crunching. To the right, example of the SEP staff working with our, again, CMP colleagues to promote salmon stewardship. By the way, that's me in the middle. Now, I had a question for you guys, because I think the population is getting taller as I get older, because, I don't think of myself as being short, but I don't know, maybe you can help me out on that one. But regardless, across the region, countless volunteers, you participate in outreach events. And I just, as an example, you each have your own events that you hold. And I can't list them all because I don't know them all. But there's, again, not enough time, but a couple that I do know. You have the Fanny Bay River Never Sleeps Festival, the Lake Babine virtual, and this year it's the virtual invisible migration event. And they're each designed to connect with people, under one common goal, and that's, again, salmon. So with that, it brings me to this last slide. And I just want to say that these are really exciting times for community engagement. I am very much looking forward to strengthening our commitment to each of you to improve our ability to work smarter for salmon. Like this young girl, the department is very thankful, and I'm very thankful for your passion and your collective wisdom that you bring to the table every day, with or without us. It's that passion and wisdom that propels me to want to continue down this journey. I want to thank you for your attention, and I want to thank you for your kindness.
Thank you, volunteers and stewards, for all the work you do all year round, and for taking time today to attend this virtual workshop and this overview of the Salmon Enhancement Program enhancement operations. There's 3 components to the SEP program. That's the Planning and Assessment Group, the Community Involvement and Restoration Group that many of you are familiar with, and Enhancement Operations. Today, I'll give a short overview of enhancement operations. My outline is going to cover the program and the infrastructure, typical spawning channels, typical hatcheries. I'm going to talk a little bit about interdependencies of the program, a little bit about legislation and activities and guidelines, and what's ahead. So what is SEP operations? It's the 17 DFO major hatchery facilities and 6 spawning channels around the region. They are operated by hatchery managers or watershed enhancement managers, their assistant managers, fish culturists, general laborers, and maintenance staff. The program is supported by regional headquarters and Vancouver Island located management, admin, and biological and veterinary support staff. The estimated infrastructure replacement value is over $500 million, and annually we utilize approximately 165 full-time equivalent employees worth of labor and $17 million in O&M and salary. We produce about 300 million juvenile fish annually, that then result in approximately 4 million additional adult salmon returns to our coastal waters. So what's a spawning channel? Here's a photo of Nadina spawning channel in the upper reaches of the Fraser River. It's at the upstream limit of sockeye migration before a waterfall into Nadina Lake, which you can see in the background. The channel extends the available spawning habitat and takes advantage of the good upstream lake water supply, which you can see above the word spawning, and the extensive rearing and habitat downstream in the 100-kilometer-long Francois Lake. In the fall or late summer, approximately 20,000 adult salmon can spawn in this spawning channel. They produce about 6 million fry, which migrate down into Nadina Lake and eventually result in additional 200,000 adults salmon returning to coastal waters in the system. Here's a photo of Pinkett Creek spawning channel. It's 2.7 kilometers long. It is located on Babine Lake near Burns Lake. Spawning channels are typically located in a location where there's limited spawning habitat or unutilized rearing habitat. Babine Lake is one of the largest lakes in BC and has excellent sockeye rearing. The natural spawning habitat on this river is limited by a waterfall, so this spawning channel helps take advantage of the excellent rearing habitat in Babine Lake by providing additional sockeye fry. Most spawning channels have some kind of counting fence that's used in the spawning season to guide salmon into the spawning channel. In this case, here at Fulton River Channel, a flashboard is used to help count tens of fish that swim into the channel at a time. And it's quite something to see thousands of fish arriving and migrating into the channel. In the spring, the same fence is refitted with a smaller screen and is used to help count and enumerate the juvenile salmon that leave the facility. A number of SEP hatchery and spawning channel facilities have significant water control and storage structures. Here we have some photos of the dam at Fulton River that's located at historical falls and some of the infrastructure located near Horn Lake at Qualicum River. Facility managers are experts in not only fish culture, but also in infrastructure and water management. And many of them are involved in snow pillow information collection, implementing dam safety protocols, and controlling the water flows out of the reservoirs to optimize fish production. Spawning channels are really efficient ways to produce fish, and their ability to mimic natural spawning in incubation conditions is excellent, but they do require some maintenance. Most channels require some kind of gravel turning or cleaning annually or semi-annually, and in some cases, the gravel needs to be removed, resorted, and replaced. And move on now to hatchery overview. And here in the photograph, we see Nitnat Hatchery on the west side of Vancouver Island. It's one of our larger facilities, but you can see in the photo some of the typical infrastructure that's associated with the facility. That is crew quarters so that staff can stay on site 24/7 if necessary to help keep water flow and fish alive. They have a variety of indoor and outdoor rearing spaces, indoor maintenance buildings, indoor rearing locations, and a variety of infrastructure, storage sheds, etc. Here's a photograph of Tenderfoot Creek Hatchery with a bit more of a close-up look. In the foreground, we see the smaller Capilano-style rearing containers that are used for early rearing of juvenile salmon after they emerge from incubation, as well as a variety of round or circular containers and concrete containers. They're used to rear larger fish or to hold adult salmon before spawning. We also use a variety of semi-natural or earthen ponds at some locations. In terms of water supply, most hatcheries have both lake or river surface water supply as well as a groundwater supply, but some are groundwater only. The supply may be gravity fed or pumped or combination. And the water quality, temperature, and source is very important depending on the type of facility and fish culture objectives. Groundwater from depth needs to be aerated, typically to remove nitrogen and oxygenate the water. The white cylinders in the center of this photograph are actually an energy efficient version of an aeration tower, as opposed to the larger, taller concrete one on the right, which requires additional pumping. Many of our facilities, we are implementing energy efficiency measures and greenhouse gas reduction efforts to green our operations. In terms of broodstock collection, a variety of techniques are used depending on the fish culture objectives. At some locations, fish swim right into the facility and are sorted, collected, and spawned quite easily. In other programs, we actually have to go off-site to collect the fish. Fish may be collected or arrive at the facility and be ready to spawn right away, or in some cases may need to be held till they mature for days, weeks, or even months. Typically, though, we are trying to collect adult returns through the early, mid, and late arrival migration period so that our programs are representative of the natural life history of the stocks. Here's an example of off-site brood collection at a remote location on the Choco River. This is a crew of Salmon Enhancement Program staff as well as DFO stock assessment staff working together on that effort. This stock will be part of a new Pacific Salmon Treaty Coated Wire Tag indicator stock. Once we have the fish and they're ready to be spawned, the eggs are removed from the females and mixed with milk from the males. This is a typical smaller egg take program underway, but we do a variety of programs from quite small to quite large. We typically are spawning 1-to-1 male to female, but in some conservation stocks or special situations, we'll use a variety of crosses and spawning techniques to optimize the genetic diversity of the program. We also use a variety of disinfection and strict biosecurity protocols during this phase of the fish culture program. Again, depending on the size and nature of the program, we could use large bulk incubators where large numbers of eggs can be incubated, right down to quite discrete, specialized programs where we have small individual containers for each female or even individual crosses of males and females. At this point, we can also surface disinfect the eggs, and so they can initiate their incubation program in a disinfected, sterilized fashion. There's very few pathogens that are of concern once we get fish to this stage. Most fish that we produce are released after a very short-term period of feeding and rearing or no rearing at all. We also do 1-year smoke programs, and we do have a few captive brood programs where we actually keep adults to maturity and then enter them into the fish culture program as part of a conservation effort. I haven't gone into all the details here about rearing, but needless to say, getting healthy fish from incubation to release requires a significant effort and could probably be a big, long presentation in itself. As I mentioned earlier, a variety of rearing facilities are used. Here we have some photos of earthen ponds, circular ponds, as well as in the bottom left corner, a net pen rearing program where we may rear fish for a short term in a lake or ocean prior to release. Fish are marked during rearing. We can vary the temperature to lay down a otolith mark in their ear bone, which can be used to ID the fish later on. We also use coated wire tags. And more recently, we've been using parental-based tagging, where we take genetic samples from broodstock, which then help us to identify juvenile fish that result from those parents. One of the challenges with off-site broodstock collection programs is now we then have to return the juvenile fish to their stream of origin. And here we have some photos of the Choco fry transport, complicated transport from a lower mainland facility back to the Choco watershed. And in the bottom left, there's a photograph of sockeye fry that are transported as part of a joint effort with Alaska in the Stikine watershed. I'm going to talk a little bit now about interdependencies. The Salmon Enhancement Program is supported by and works closely with the community involvement and restoration and planning units that I mentioned. Our support biologists and vets help out with the community involvement program, and we do many joint projects from small hatchery programs to supporting joint efforts around habitat restoration. We also collaborate a lot with our DFO partners in real property safety and security, and our health and safety and business management groups. We also provide information to and use information from science, stock assessment, fisheries management, and our Pacific salmon treaty partners. SEP hatcheries are an important tool for responding to conservation and fishery opportunities and act as a research platform to better understand many aspects of salmon physiology, genetics, and ecology. All hatcheries also have areas that are open to the public, and many have displays and info about salmon and salmon habitat. Hatcheries are popular for tours by school groups, our colleagues from Ottawa that want to learn more about Pacific salmon, politicians, and we've even had members of the British whale family attend tours at our facilities. When it comes to the production we do, I think it's important to remind folks that we do have a long list of established guidelines and procedures that we follow. We have the production planning framework that we start with at the beginning of the cycle to make sure we're producing the right number of fish using the right techniques to meet the objectives we have in mind. We have a biological risk management framework, and we follow a number of pieces of legislation, including Pacific aquaculture regulations, the Fisheries Act and related regulations. And we do pre-release screening on our fish to meet fish health requirements. As I mentioned, we do have numerous guidelines, including compilations of operational guidelines, a production planning framework, and a biological risk management framework. The biological risk assessment framework identifies all the steps of fish cultures and then helps us identify potential genetic disease or ecological interactions, and then identifies legislation, guidelines, and adaptive management to address those potential risks. All our hatcheries have significant fish health management plans, typically 100 pages or longer, covering all aspects of fish culture. The objectives of that fish management plan are to keep fish healthy and maintain optimal environments. We also work with our community involvement programs that also use a similar best management practices document. So what's in store? Well, I think we all are quite aware of the climate extremes and variable ocean productivity that we've been seeing for quite some time now. There's lots of impacts and changes in freshwater habitat, from fires and droughts to high temperatures to storms, floods, beetle kills. These things are having massive landscape level changes and impacts on salmon habitat and salmon. We have a number of stocks that are listed under the wild salmon policy as red status or assessed by COSEWIC, or being considered for SARA listings. We're also having changes in fisheries that are adapting to different abundances and conservation measures. And we're having an unprecedented need and request for new enhancement, often conservation focused. So how are we responding? SEP is evolving our production planning process, guidance documents, fish health, and science info to help us better plan and undertake conservation efforts. Our infrastructure strategy is focused on maintaining the capacity we have, but also building in flexibility to meet new demands. We are well positioned to work with partners and other parts of the department to help in sustainable salmon management. And we have dedicated staff with expertise and links to watersheds, communities, and partners to work together in that effort. Many of you that are attending this workshop are part of that network. Application of new science and approaches. We've been working, as I mentioned, with genetic sampling and parental-based tagging of the fish. There's been a number of well-funded research programs to help better understand fish. The BC Salmon Restoration and Innovation Fund has been providing funding to numerous projects, including the Pacific Salmon Foundation Hatchery Effectiveness Study. There's a Strategic Salmon Health Initiative and a number of new publications, including a CSAS document recommending new genetic guidelines. And we're applying some of the U.S. hatchery reform principles in a way that will mesh well with the regional approach to enhancement. I hope that this overview gives you a little more information about what SEP hatchery operations involves. And if you do want to find out more about each specific hatchery, please check out our website at pacific.dfo and search for the SEP operations section. Thank you.
Regional headquarters office, and I manage part of the program that looks at hatchery production planning and assessment work. So I wanted to first start by thanking you for the opportunity to speak today. Communities and their dedication to the salmon resource are a critical part of salmon sustainability. And by working together, we have had and will continue to have a very positive influence. So I'm really happy to see this event go ahead and overcome the COVID roadblocks we're all facing these days. And I also recognize it's too bad we can't all be in the same room and face to face and share ideas before and after and during the sessions. But this is the next best thing. So thanks to the organizers for making it happen. So the other thing I'll just start off with is I'll note that I'd like to acknowledge the great pictures I've got throughout this presentation. They're from Paige Ackerman, who's one of our SEP biologists, Jordan Newton-Bogard, who is at Tenderfoot Hatchery, and Hakon Hammer at Snootley Hatchery. Just key pieces of what I'll go through in the presentation today is first just a quick overview of SEP, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with. But it's always good to keep the full perspective in mind. Talk a little bit about how planning and assessment activities fit within the SEP's organizational structure. Go into a little bit of the operational guidance components. So planning salmon production to meet specific objectives within a structured, science-informed and risk-managed process. And assessment of production in achieving these objectives. So whether it's for harvest, stock assessment, stock conservation and rebuilding, and public education and stewardship. And finally, go through a little bit of risk management of production to ensure that the benefits are achieved. So I'm sure many of you have seen similar graphics to this and probably in some of the presentations you've had already, but these are the broad components of SEP and where planning and assessment fits in. The package of components forms a very integrated program, both across internal SEP pieces as well as externally in DFO. Because of this, it can be difficult to tease individual pieces apart because they're also interconnected, which is part of the strength. So planning and assessment performs the role to evaluate and inform program decisions. As part of SEP is a scalable, responsive, integrated, and connected program. And obviously, community-led hatchery production, hatchery restoration and protection, salmon assessment play a big role through these specific actions, but also through the broader engagement of people on salmon and salmon issues. So when I speak to SEP fish production, the rest of the presentation, I'm including everything as part of the talk, DFO facilities and community partner facilities. So the goal statement. So this is a mouthful. Through the goal of planning and assessment for SEP hatchery production is through monitoring, analysis, and information management, providing biological ecosystem-based advice to support DFO and community partner salmon enhancement activities throughout the region and facilitate salmon production and assessment in a formal, integrated, and risk-managed manner. So it is a mouthful. So what specifically does that mean? To achieve this goal, these are the activities SEP undertakes to evaluate and manage fish production. Planning, directing, and monitoring, evaluating, and reporting on SEP stock enhancement activities. This is essentially the overall direction of the program for fish production. The development and implementation of guidelines related to stock enhancement, production planning, and assessment of SEP activities, again, to ensure the program is conducted sustainably with minimization of risks. The management of all program stock enhancement information and analysis used for reporting and decision-making. This guides and adjusts the program using adaptive management based on the results of what we were doing. So as we learn more, we can adjust what we were doing to make sure that we're achieving the outcomes that are required. And then some of the outcomes are project specific or can range as big as being international in nature, like the Pacific Salmon Treaty. Then integration with DFO and external integration and consultation through fishery planning. This is to ensure the program delivery is focused on stakeholder and client needs and links to DFO priorities. So overall, it's essentially stock assessment for hatchery stocks, including assessment and biological review of existing projects for success and risks, using various hatchery influence metrics, and then making recommendations for improvements where necessary, providing guidance on prioritization of stocks and enhancement strategies, the approaches that may be the most successful to achieve the objective, and then assessment requirements in a science-based manner. Also to facilitate the planning and adjustment process with data summaries, analysis, and reporting to make it information-based. And ultimately provide guidance to hatcheries on what assessment requirements are needed to adequately measure performance against objectives, as well as meet specific reporting requirements. So we are all here because we know that salmon hatcheries can have very positive benefits. However, like any tool, if not used thoughtfully and knowledgeably, it has some potential downsides. Hatchery fish are not wild by wild salmon policy definition, and the presence of hatchery fish has implications for wild stocks that must be assessed and managed. So the benefits are increasing salmon abundance through greater egg to fry survival that can support conservation rebuilding efforts throughout the region, and assessment and management of sustainable fishing opportunities. And the risks, which we'll talk more about later in the presentation, are how hatcheries can influence the genetics of wild salmon. And salmon genetics are one of the key principles of the wild salmon policy. Greater abundance can lead to competition with wild salmon, and hatcheries can increase the risk of disease, though rare. SEP makes decisions using documented interconnected frameworks. Basically what that means is how our choices are made have been written down. The three main components of this documentation are essentially the production planning framework, the risk management framework, and the biological assessment framework. They outline the clear accountabilities, but it's linked to SEP's program logic model, which essentially just makes sure that activities are linked clearly to outcomes. So we know what we want to see happen, and we're doing things that are going to make that happen, or there's a reasonable expectation that the activities we're undertaking are going to do what we want them to do. The program is also guided by important things like the wild salmon policy and things we can't get around, like various regulatory requirements, like specific culture regulations that apply to salmon hatchery work. You may be interested to know that SEP is considered a national program within DFO and has national reporting requirements that we must meet as well. So I'll speak a little more detail on each of the frameworks in the next few slides. And the first one is production planning. So at its most basic piece, production planning is deciding how many fish are to be produced from SEP managed or supported fish culture facilities to meet defined objectives. A formal annual fishery enhancement planning process is used to prepare these plans for each facility and then combined for an overall production plan for SEP. And this is the same for all SEP or SEP partnered hatcheries. Again, process and projects are informed by the WSP, regulations, and various guidelines and best management practices that apply to our collective work. So production planning framework describes, again, the accountability process, scope, and objective. This is an annual cycle that's part of that. It's integrated within DFO with our fisheries management branch and our science branch are the main contributors. Includes input from communities, harvesters, and stakeholders. The outcomes, which is the production plan itself, is also layered into both the Northern and Southern Pacific Salmon Integrated Fisheries Management Plan. That's the annual salmon fishery planning that lays out what fisheries are going to take place where, what type of constraints from conservation issues there might be on those things, that type of approach. And then the planning outputs, which are target fish production, are included in Pacific Aquaculture Regulation licenses for all facilities, SEP facilities, like DFO run facilities or partner run facilities. So I mentioned a little bit about enhancement objectives. And these are a key part of planning any enhancement project. SEP and partners achieve a number of specific objectives across stock assessment, conservation, stock rebuilding, harvest, and important as well is stewardship and public education. So, oops, sorry guys. Accidentally hit my mouse. So a big part of the structured approach is having specific objectives for all production. This is the why of hatchery production. So assessment can be for specific information needs, for larger, broader regional stock assessment requirements, or even for, as I mentioned earlier, international information requirements on the Pacific salmon tree. This is used for harvest sharing between Canada and the United States. The big example is code wire tagging indicators for shrimp and coho salmon. These can be assessment objectives can be very useful when there's information gaps that are hindering management or rebuilding projects. These projects can be ongoing and can end when data is complete or end when the project is not successful. Conservation and rebuilding enhancements generally on a smaller scale with a different goal: to increase abundance and support wild recovery. These usually have an end point when a given target or targets are achieved. Production for harvest is typically to support terminal, individual stock-based fisheries, sometimes mark selective fisheries, and if the fishery, genetic, and ecosystem goals can be met, these types of projects can be ongoing. And then stewardship, public education. This is where, as you all contribute to, is using production as a platform to engage the public in salmon sustainability initiatives and create a culture of aquatic stewardship. When compared to major DFO facilities, community-run hatcheries are generally smaller scale, production-wise, where often the fish production is the means and not necessarily the end. Again, these projects can be ongoing as long as guidelines for genetic and ecosystem goals can be met. So biological assessment, fundamental to evaluating the performance of production projects. And performance is evaluated against the objectives that I just went through. It is the means by which SEP measures the effectiveness of various enhancement strategies, the program's contribution to fisheries and rebuilding of populations, and the influence of hatchery salmon on wild populations. It also supports regional DFO stock assessments, harvest management planning, and evaluation. As mentioned, is clearly linked to Pacific salmon treaty obligations for Canada. It's a complex process with lots of interconnectivity and interdependencies. So what does the assessment framework actually do? So here's an example of some of the activities and what assessment activities and analytical techniques can allow DFO to use to manage. Yeah.
Can I just get you to start at the top of that SEP assessment framework again? When you got out of your chair and we go around, the audio went way off.
Okay.
Sorry to doing that, but just that whole start from the top.
Okay. So the SEP assessment framework. So assessment activities and analytical techniques allow DFO to manage fisheries and to determine some key pieces of information. Things like distribution and contribution of stocks to fisheries, the effects of hatchery-wild interactions, the progress of conservation and rebuilding programs, and the success of enhancement strategies. A structured assessment framework allows for the evaluation of these factors, and SEP contributes to the structure through specific hatchery production and various marking or tagging programs. Keep in mind that these are programs that are not just run by SEP, but are science, stock assessment, and fishery management folks as well. To note that SEP assessment contributes to evaluations and tracking of stock status for many populations. In some cases, the only information for certain stocks. So all enhancement projects are assessed in some form, with the being dependent on the species, project size, release group, enhancement strategy. The key assessment outputs are juvenile production, survival rate, and exploitation rate from fisheries, and other biological metrics. So further to assessment and evaluation, these activities are critical to SEP program delivery. I talked a little bit in the beginning about SEP being a national program with national program performance requirements. So these are kind of the the mechanics of the bureaucracy of government programming, but very important, and we can use it to help inform the success of the things we're undertaking. So the assessment framework details assessment methodologies, provides assessment planning and implementation roles and responsibilities across various parts of DFO and partners. Biological assessment involves specific assessment activities such as I mentioned, juvenile marking and the analytical techniques to calculate those various parameters that we can use to determine if our project is successful or not, or what may need to be adjusted to make them successful in terms of an adaptive management approach. And the key piece here, in the previous slide, I mentioned that every line of production has some kind of assessment associated with it. That's based off of the direct and indirect indicator approach. So some direct stocks are designated as indicators and are deemed to be representative of other stocks in the area as they're comparable geographically or in certain life history features. Then indicator stocks can then be used to develop averages, what we call biostandards, which are used for indirect assessments, where logistics or costs make direct assessment impossible. Enhancement assessment data, especially for shrimp and coho, is widely used for assessing wild salmon stock status, developing forecasts of adult returns, monitoring in-season abundance, and broader salmon treaty harvest sharing analyses. Coordination of the activities in a manner that supports both SEP and other regional DFO needs involves pre-season and in-season planning to ensure that all activities are identified, funded, and implemented. So the final piece of the operational guidance is the biological risk management framework. The wild salmon policy links us to the need for rigorous science-based assessment that enables evidence-based decisions. From the WSP, I'll quote here that enhancement may be used to provide harvest opportunities and fishery benefits as part of an integrated strategic plan. But WSP also says that enhancement, particularly hatcheries, poses some acknowledged risks to wild salmon. But there was a commitment in the 2005 WSP to develop a risk assessment framework for the risk of hatchery fish to wild salmon. And the biological risk management framework is that commitment. So the risk management framework outlines a systematic method for the identification, assessment, and management of enhancement risks to wild salmon populations. Its principles are employed in all hatchery planning. So the RMF identifies three main categories of risk: genetic, disease, and ecological. And it links these risks to specific enhancement activities and outlines the approaches for mitigations to reduce, eliminate, or avoid these potentially negative outcomes. So a suite of pathways of effects is used in this process. So we have an activity and looking into a potential undesirable outcome, and then the mitigations that can be put in place to reduce or avoid that potential downside. So the RMF provides specific and clear guidance on steps when conducting enhancement, and provides a platform for educating enhancement practitioners, whether they're DFO staff or community partner-based folks, on the risks inherent in enhancement activities and the mitigations necessary to be able to eliminate or reduce that risk. And the framework assimilates a number of existing SEP guidelines, best management practices, and facility license requirements, like production planning, operational guidelines, fish health management plans, carcass guidelines, fry stocking densities, and aquaculture licensing. It all comes together in one place. So in closing, hatcheries have clear benefits. From producing fish for fisheries or stock rebuilding to engaging people in salmon sustainability and building a culture of aquatic stewardship that benefits many components of salmon ecosystems. Enhancement is only one of three levers to pull to influence salmon populations across hatcheries, harvest, and habitat, and is best employed as part of a larger recovery planning and people engagement process. Clear objectives, monitoring, and learning are important parts of enhancement. And as new information becomes available, appropriate adjustments can be made with the proper assessment in place as part of an evidence-based approach to resource stewardship. So obviously, ending on a slide asking for questions of a recorded presentation isn't going to work, but thanks for the opportunity to talk to everyone a little bit about SEP, DFO, and your assessment processes, the risk management approach, and the use of this fantastic tool that we have at our disposal to encourage everyone to do the things that they need to do to ensure long-term salmon sustainability. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks to all of you for your presentations. It's interesting because we all see different pieces of SEP, but it's good to see a fuller picture. And speaking of SEP, the Salmonid Enhancement Program, we wanted to make sure that the theme of partnerships came out during this workshop, because it definitely does take all members of the team working together, all cogs in the wheel. And we have such longevity in our groups through the province. Once people seem to get the bug or the passion for stream keeping or salmon enhancement, they are in it for the long haul, which we definitely appreciate. And they're also able to share their passion with new members so that we can keep recruiting new members to help us with all of the hard work that we do every day. And it is hard work. I just wanted to reassure people that I know sometimes it seems that it's a hard road. I mean, we all had a very challenging last year, but we do need to keep focusing on our wins. Things change around us from year to year. And the one thing that stays the same is the commitment and the passion that all of you have for the volunteer work that you do. And we appreciate that. I wanted to share a quote that I just heard this morning, and it is from Dr. Jane Goodall. She said, "You have an indomitable spirit. You can make change in your own life every single day to make this a better world. There is still a window of time. Nature can still win if we give her a chance." Thank you, Jane. And thank you to everybody who works tirelessly at keeping BC a salmon-friendly place. We would like to present the awards for the SEP workshop next. And to do this, I'd like to introduce Sandy Hollett-Kenning, who is our Senior Community Advisor.
So every 2 years at our SEP Community Workshop, we try to recognize a member from the community and a member from DFO to really acknowledge their outstanding contributions. Today, I'm here to recognize 2 people that work within our community for their outstanding work that they have carried on over the many years they've been involved with the Salmon Enhancement Program. The first person I wanted to recognize today from the community is Shane Peachman. So Shane first became involved with the Salmon Enhancement Program and Hyde Creek Watershed Society as a retiree in 2001. He and his wife Jean dug right in and began planning and fundraising for the Hyde Creek hatchery and began construction shortly after. His experience in all aspects of construction, selection of materials, subcontracting, project management, and his tireless enthusiasm and dedication has led to the fantastic community asset that is the current hatchery and home of the very active Watershed Society that we have today. So in time, Shane was elected to the role of Society President and continues in this position today. Shane was instrumental in the building of the strong and positive relationships between the Society and the cities of Coquitlam and Port Coquitlam, and of course SEP. Additionally, he has enlisted and trained a large number of very capable and dedicated volunteers, and they also remain active today. Shane's passion, drive, commitment to the hatchery and surrounding watersheds and his community is greatly admired and appreciated by all of those associated with you. Thank you, Shane, for your outstanding contribution to the Salmon Enhancement Program. And the second recipient we want to recognize today is from Fisheries and Oceans Canada, and that's Bev Bowler. For many years, Bev worked at our regional headquarters, focusing mainly on writing, graphic design, and layout work. Much of her career is spent with the Salmon Enhancement Program, specifically the Community Involvement Program as an education coordinator in the Lower Fraser River area. In this role, she has mastered and perfected the delivery of DFO's Stream to Sea program in the Lower Fraser area. Responsible for the planning, egg delivery support, fry release coordination, and follow-up reporting for over 400 classroom incubation units in the area is a massive undertaking that Bev has improved and refined over the years. The website she designed is constantly improving upon, is integral to the success of the Salmon in the Classroom program, and is constantly utilized as a resource by educators from around the province and further afield. As part of this program, Bev collects and distributes hundreds of adult salmon every year for classroom dissection so kids can experience hands-on learning. Bev's editing, design, and layout skills are always being sought after by her colleagues. She can be credited for many documents in circulation today within SEP. Recently, she's been lending her skills to the modernization of DFO's Streamkeeper Handbook, a large undertaking that will benefit greatly from her expertise. Additionally, Bev supports the storm drain marking in the Lower Fraser mainland area, another task that requires an organized strategic approach to ensure supplies are stocked and distributed and training is given as required. Bev also provides display materials for and attends many SEP-related community stewardship events around the Lower Mainland each year. Thank you, Bev, for your outstanding support of our Salmon Enhancement Program.
Congratulations to the two of you, Shane and Bev. I know it's always a hard time when you're on an award selection committee because there's so many amazing people, and thank you to everyone. The next presentation coming up will be the SEP Memorial Wall video in memory of all of our volunteers who we've lost over the years. After that, we will take a break for lunch. During lunch, feel free to start taking a peek at the SEPFlix videos, which is kind of a replacement for the display boards that we're used to seeing at a normal SEP workshop, where you can go around and look at different projects that groups are doing and get maybe some ideas for your own area. And also, once lunch is finished and we have our afternoon sessions, I'll just let you know that what you need to do to sign on to those is to go to your email that you received at the end of the week, the one where you clicked to get onto this current morning session, and then the session that you're registered in will have a link for the afternoon, for Saturday afternoon. If you haven't registered for an afternoon session and you would still like to see one of them, you can go to the very bottom of that email and click on one of the Saturday afternoon sessions to view. Thanks to all of you.
you.